It was hurtful to hear you talk about the reputations of two United States senators who built their reputations and career on the segregation of race in this country. And it was not only that, but you also worked with them to oppose busing. And, you know, there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools. And she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me.
I mean, these were questions that she answered. Electability. I think she answered some hunger in the Democratic Party for generational change. She answers some questions and some hunger for a woman in that office. She answers the question and speaks to the hunger for diversity. I mean, she is the answer to almost every question that I hear Democrats asking.
Well, and I think she also found a very deft way to deal with what has been one of her vulnerabilities, which is her record as a prosecutor, right? I mean, we, HuffPost, have written a lot of quite tough stories investigating her background on things like truancy, where you had ended up with kids going into the criminal justice system for really no reason because of overly harsh laws that she prosecuted when she was the Attorney General of California. And this has really been a point of vulnerability for her, but by couching her own experience with race. And I think another place where I think people have overstated that vulnerability is that they forget that African Americans care a lot about crime because there are disproportionately victims of crime, right? And a tough prosecutor who's seen as fair and competent, who comes from that community, I think actually does have a certain power and a role to play. So,
and it's a complete inoculation from what we already know has been telegraphed on the right, which is to paint the entire Democratic Party as too far to the left. I mean, it's just in the mind of rational people.
But the thing, I think, and I totally agree with her. I think that's where they rob, she robs them. You're talking about a lady that was a district attorney and then went on to be state attorney general.
Yeah.
So you can't say she's soft on crime. And she was attacked a lot by the left. I mean, we question her in some cases in National Action Network. So you can't say that. But when she talks about I was bust and that I went in and built a career, that answers a lot of the attacks on the left because some of them didn't even go that trajectory. But
all right, so the Democratic debate is over, at least the first couple rounds. Couple of do-nothing so-called debates where everything was on the table for white America. Everything was on the table for the casual racist. Couple of sops to the right-wingers, too. Try to carve off as many of those votes as possible. But for black folks, you know, the base of the Democrat Party, the actual people who turn out the most and who they depend on in order to get them into high office, nothing mentioned for black folks. Nothing at all. No mention of the word reparations, not even a mention of the word. So what does that tell you? You would think that they would be saying it repeatedly, especially after the do-nothing hearing from 10 days ago. You would think that somebody would have brought it up a few times. They would have been making it where this needs to be a signature policy. At the very least, we got to bring it up, if only for pro forma purposes, but they didn't. So that tells you everything you need to know about the Democratic debates. It's irrelevant to black empowerment. So ain't no point spending much time on it. But the white media is trying to figure out how to position, hopefully, some would-be relevant contender to Donald Trump. Make sure that the horse race stays interesting. Joe Biden's lead is plummeting, as I told you that it would. And Kamala Harris apparently got in as a singer. And what does she get that singer in on? By pointing to Joe Biden's racist record. Now, why does she think that that would have some sort of cachet? Why does she think that that would be effective? Because she had seen what people online were saying about Joe Biden. So Kamala Harris ain't had nothing to say about Joe Biden on the issue of race until now. So what it means is she understands Joe Biden has a vulnerability. As far as she's concerned, I might as well go ahead and take care of that vulnerability because, well, Joe Biden ain't smart enough to be able to capitalize on mine, and he made the mistake of saying he wasn't going low, mainly because he can't. Joe Biden's no debater. He's in over his head. This is a political vanity project for him, and it's going to go the same way it went the last couple of times that he tried this stupid stunt. But after Kamala Harris had her little foray, she dipped her toes in the waters and because of the fact that she didn't fall flat on her face, the white media is trying to make it out like she served the second course of the Last Supper. Trying to praise her, talking about her as if she's just the greatest thing ever. And the white media is making sure that they tell everybody, oh, her criminal justice record, well, she's handled that. That's in the past now. Well, she knows what she's handled that. She's handled that. That's what they were saying. This is meant to be the white media attempting to arbitrarily bestow innocence on Kamala Harris. Oh, we're declaring that her reprehensible criminal justice atrocities, all of the crimes that she committed under color of law, we're going to just declare that stuff's in the past. She's answered for it. Oh, she's absolutely invincible at this point. Her record is bulletproof, so don't worry about it. There's nothing to be said. So the white media is making it clear that they're going to be, at the very least, giving her the occasional pat on the head, unless they find somebody else who happens to establish themselves better than her. It was not even a good night for Kamala Harris, but she got in a couple of zingers and made an otherwise snore fest somewhat interesting for a few moments. But what is Kamala Harris going to do to appeal to black voters? Well, one of the things she's trying to do is to go to the civil rights retreads, the NAACP, and see if those fools out in South Carolina will help her out. She went to an NAACP function just a few weeks back. And the South Carolina chapter of the NAACP gave her a platform so that she could spew every half-truth and untruth that she could think of, and they were plenty. Just go ahead and listen to this, because we're going to be doing a deep dive on this one. The debates are not going to teach you anything new, but the fact that Kamala Harris, the white media, is attempting to rehabilitate her image, rehabilitate her standing. They're trying to figure out a way to fix up the damage that we've done to her. At the very least, they're going to see if it's possible. Maybe her ship can be made to float again if they patch about the 500 holes we busted in it. But look at what she does. It's the same crap that she's been at for the longest time. And do expect that there's going to be a number of pauses in here, because we're going to be breaking this down step by step.
And the heroes of my youth were, of course, the lawyers of that civil rights movement. Thurgood Marshall, Charles Hamilton Houston, Constance Baker Motley. Those individuals who understood the skill of this profession of law to translate the passion from the streets to the courtrooms of our country.
Now, there's two big problems with what she said. First of all, this our country crap. Malcolm warned you about that. Watch out for these Negroes who were talking about the United States of America, this white supremacist toilet. They start using words like we and our and us. For black folks, these are terms that have absolutely no meaning here in this white supremacist hellhole. But you see that right off the jump, she starts off with the name dropping, just like she did for her silly announcement at Howard University. She's name dropping Thurgood Marshall and some other fossils from a bygone era who didn't do really anything that actually helped us. Well, I guess at least I should be glad that she didn't mention Fife. Though you notice that she didn't mention Johnny Cochran, by the way. Whether you like him or not, you can't deny the fact that the man is one of the most influential black legal minds who ever lived. In fact, forget about black legal minds. He's one of the most brilliant legal minds of all time. This is supposed to make black folks' hearts go pitter-pat, I suppose. Well, with that pathetic gathering of do-nothing morons at the NAACP, obviously this kind of tactic would work on those simple Simons. Like a bunch of trained monkeys, they applaud on cue. And at this point, they're not even sure what they're applauding for. That would take brains, and I would never accuse the NAACP of that.
And in my own one, lawyers like my Uncle Sherman were the ones who our family and friends would always call on when there was a problem or something went wrong, and when people needed help. So my Uncle Sherman, he was born in Louisiana, and of course at the time the segregated South, legally segregated, and he went to law school in California. And when I was a child, he taught me how to play chess, because he said, you need to learn how to think strategically. And he said, you need to learn how to think multiple steps before the first step you take. And whenever there was a problem in our community, he'll know what to do.
Notice that Kamala never mentions her father. She ain't said about daddy in a while at age. She mentions her uncle, and she makes sure to say that he's from Louisiana. Well, Kamala's mother, the Brahmin, that means white, Indian. But she doesn't mention her own father. This is a racial fraudster who's trying to manufacture her own black credibility. But I did find it interesting that apparently her uncle taught her how to play chess. It's interesting on two fronts. First of all, it just goes to show that all of the mountain climbing and climbing the ladder and such that she was doing in California, well, that kind of connivance was ingrained into her at an early age. But it also makes sense because what's the main thing that you do in chess? How do you move? You move by hopping and jumping, and Kamala Harris has been jumping from one male who can help her to the next. So chess is a good way. That's a good analogy for her to use. She's certainly been thinking strategically. How can this man be used to help me get where I want to go? How can this person be used? How can black people be used to help me get to where I want to go? Making her moves by trying to figure out how she's going to manipulate and maneuver other people. So yeah, it makes sense. But this speech is such a feeble attempt at image rehabilitation on her part, it makes me nauseous. Kamala Harris has never cared about anyone or anything except Kamala Harris. So when I heard her praising her lawyer uncle from Louisiana but educated in California, because she said that, well, she said, I thought that was his name. My uncle from Louisiana but educated in California. Well, when she mentioned him, I could see that she was basically praising herself by proxy. I could pretty much sniff the general tone, tenor, and direction of this little self-serving speech. Kamala herself grew up all over the place, Jamaica, Canada, etc., but she ultimately went back to California to practice persecuting black people. She then goes to a bullcrap league defense of prosecutors.
I know, and I knew then. Prosecutors have not always done the work of justice. There have been prosecutors that refused to seat black jurors, refused to prosecute lynchings, disproportionately condemned young black men to death row, and looked the other way in the face of police brutality.
You know how insulting it is to hear that from her? We all know that prosecutorial misconduct and anti-black racism by DAs and prosecutors in general at the state, local, and federal level is the rule and not the exception. But Kamala Harris talks about all of this illegal prosecutorial misconduct like it's some kind of anomaly. Well, I know that there is. No, it ain't there is. It's I know that in America, almost all prosecutions, especially those against black people, are nothing more than racial attacks taking place by a bureaucrat. All the things that she named, prosecutors who illegally racially purge black people from juries, who selectively prosecute black people regardless of if there's a case or not, who aid and abet police violence like she did. Talk about looking the other way at police violence. Yeah, kind of like when the public defender's office in San Francisco tells you turn over the names of the dirty cops and you say I won't. Or as in the case of Matrice Richardson, a young woman who disappeared under extremely suspicious circumstances, and the last people whose clutches she was in the hands of happened to be the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department. But Kamala Harris, well, she looked the other way on that one, and even went a little bit farther than that. All those things that she talked about, she acts like it happened a long time ago, or that it basically happens once in a while. That's a lie. It happens all day, every day. This is what the job of prosecutors in the United States is. This is what the job of the prosecutors is. To persecute black people. These are not occasional events. This is standard operating procedure. And it is a bald-faced lie for her to try to pretend like, oh, these are anomalies. The hell they are. The biggest crime scene in your city is your local DA's office. The prosecutors are part of the problem. They don't function as simple, impartial arbiters of the law. They function as racially hostile bureaucrats who have systematized the incarceration and murder of black people as a legal process. When you deal with black lawyers in particular, you better understand these guys have invested everything in into their law license and their associations, usually with white people. And white supremacy runs those state bar associations, so you can't expect for your law degree holding Negro to actually decide he's going to go to war with the very system that he's depending on for his professional credentials. White supremacy doesn't have to hold the threat of disbarment over a black lawyer's head. Black lawyers, by and large, long ago decided that they could finesse their way into the upper echelons of white power by proving that they were as dedicated to white supremacy as any racist cop, prosecutor, or judge. That's the reality, folks. That's the game Kamala Harris is playing. Now remember how earlier in her self-serving scream, she mentioned her sainted uncle from Louisiana who went to get educated in California, and how everybody went to old Uncle Sherman with their problems. If you had a hangnail, or if your love life was in a slump, or if you had a cold or athlete's foot, all you have to do is just go see Uncle Sherman and he'll know what to do. Everybody keeps coming to Uncle Sherman because they can depend on him, etc., etc. Well, she never mentioned her supernatural uncle before now, and I'm quite familiar with writing techniques, particularly the writing technique of typing. Someone who is a forerunner or a predecessor to a far stronger or the authentic version of something which will come along later. You usually see this a lot in the Bible, but it's actually a literary technique, not necessarily a religious and ecumenical. So I knew as soon as I heard Kamala Harris talking about her uncle and talking about how everybody goes in, I'm like, I've heard her talk like this before, usually about herself. She usually likes to tell everybody how she's the person who all of these folks want to come to in Oakland. Ever since we exposed Kamala Harris as the anti-black fraud she is, she's been constantly repeating the same claptrap talking point about how the black residents of Oakland were desperately seeking her out, how the residents of Oakland knew her by name, and whenever they came to the DA's office or what have you, they were like, we want to talk to Kamala. I want to talk to Kamala, only Kamala. And always coming to her for help. These Oakland residents were practically knocking down her door daily, demanding that she prosecute other black people. Apparently, there was nobody else who was willing to. Which begs the question why black people were largely disproportionately incarcerated before she became the DA. See, trying to find a way to blame black people for your misdeeds, this is what Bill Clinton did when he was confronted on the '94 crime bill. He tried to claim that, well, I didn't want to sign it, but all these black preachers, they made me do it. Kamala Harris doesn't even have the decency to at least stop at that point. She says black mothers wanted her to go after black people, and instead of saying I was wrong for doing a lot of this stuff, instead she says she was proud to do it because she wanted them in jail too.
After I was elected district attorney, as in a lot of communities, there were homicides happening. And it was on a regular basis that mothers would come to the front window of the office. And they would arrive, and the receptionist, they would tell her,
okay.
I want to talk to Kamala.
This is all
I only want to talk to Kamala.
Don't you?
I want to talk to Kamala. So the receptionist would come and get me
Murder
out of my office, and I'd run to go to the front window. And, of course, I knew exactly why those mothers were there. They were the mother of a murdered child.
Come on.
And these mothers were there for their babies.
Like she uses
because their babies were young men who had been killed by gun violence in the street. And it had been months since her son's death, and yet a killer still walked free. And I would bring them back to my office, and they would collapse in my arms and cry, and they would say, my son is dead, but yet they're not investigating the case. They don't appear to be putting resources into it. They don't appear to be taking it seriously. They are not taking my pain seriously. They are not acknowledging my pain, and my son is being treated like a statistic.
So you see that bringing up this Uncle Sherman, the only reason this heifer even brought up this guy was as a clumsy segue to her own talking point, this rotten old piece of pablum that she keeps chattering about that black people in Oakland trust in her. Oh, she's basically Kamala from the hood. That's what she's trying to say. She's trying to say that, oh, I had street cred. I had a hood pass. The black folks, they sought me out by name because they trusted me, because they knew that I'm square, dealing, fair-minded, even-handed Kamala Harris. That's what she's trying to say. Oh, the black folks, they trusted me. They knew that I'm one of them. That's what she was trying to say. And Kamala's form of help to the black community, though, always seemed to take the form of prosecution. Notice how she never talks about how black people in Oakland demanded that she go after the police. Apparently, black folks never came to her and said the cops are responsible for killing one of my loved ones, I believe, and you got to do something. You see, she doesn't talk about the father of Patrice Richardson. He went to her, too. And Kamala Harris said, hey, can't do nothing for you. Yeah, I guess the black folks in Oakland, they never brought their grievances against the police to her. They never said, hey, obviously no resources being brought against these police. Nobody's acknowledging our pain and taking us seriously. Apparently that never comes up. And now that she's spent enough time ingratiating herself with that group of ignorant geriatrics and dropped some names and tried to palm herself off to being someone from the black community, someone who the Oakland residents trusted, so that means her refusal to give up the names of dirty cops, that's okay, because she's got black hood cred, remember? And her threatening to lock up a homeless woman because her kids skip school, well, that's okay too. Because the black community, they're cool with that. Why? The black community, they co-sign everything she does. Now, notice how she didn't actually say the black community co-signs what she does. Instead, she makes it sound like, well, I was always being sought out by the black community. Man, that's some freaking white liberal nonsense. That's how you expect some corny white liberal to talk. Well, these Negroes, some of my best friends are black, and in the black community, why, they would seek me out by name. I'm a Negro whisperer for all of these little nigglets out here. That's what you expect a white liberal to talk like. She does not speak as if she's part of the black community. She speaks as if she's the official overseer of the black community. And they gotta come to me because I'm the head Indian in charge. That's the way she's talking. She's keeping the black community not at arm's length, but at freaking 3 blocks away length at least. But it's okay though, because according to Kamala, the black community trusted her so much, was always seeking her out because she was so beloved in the black community, so trusted. And by the way, all the prisoners who were overcrowded in California prisons and whose constitutional rights she categorically violated by refusing to let the low-level, non-violent offenders go, even after the courts told her to do it, I guess that's okay too. See, she's trying to hide behind the black community. She just claims with absolutely no corroborating witnesses or supporting witnesses that the community trusted her, and because of that, well, we can't say that she did anything wrong against the black community. Why? She's got all of these imaginary black folks backing her up.
I'll tell you that in this election, regarding my background as a prosecutor, there have been those who have questioned my motivations, my beliefs, and what I have done.
Finally, she gets around to it. This is the real reason she wanted to stand in front of the NAACP, so she could have somebody applaud her while she takes little slow, low-key, slick shots at the new voice of the black media. Well, let's go ahead and answer one thing. Kamala, no, I have never questioned your motivations. You've made your motivations abundantly clear to the black community. All I've ever done is remind people what your motivations are. I have never questioned your beliefs either, because half of your beliefs are just empty, ignorant opinions, and the other half of your beliefs are outright lies. You're entitled to your delusions, though, but your delusions have been weaponized with the legal authority that you had as a prosecutor when you enabled murderers to go untouched so long as they had badges. And you went after the downtrodden and the innocent, and you laugh like a cackling witch about it. Like a coward, you refuse to go after the truly criminal. And I certainly don't question what you've done, because what you've done is unquestionably wrong. There is no debate about your corruption, Kamala Harris. There is no debate about your cronyism or your mendacity. There's no question about it. Your record is unquestionably reprehensible. I haven't questioned your record, I exposed your record. And the reason your panties are all in a bunch is because I successfully got other people to do the same thing. You went from front runner to dark horse in almost 24 hours flat, and I am proud of the work I did to bring you down. I am proud of exposing your feculent record and forcing you to have to deal with it and making it to a liability that you cannot get away from and that we're not going to let the white media whitewash. And no amount of white media headlines and phony white media puff pieces and fake white media praise is going to change any of that. The new voices of black media and Professor Black Truth in specific, we're in this for the long haul. This was not a one and done on you. This is just the beginning. As long as you're out there, we're going to be out here. And we will be out here long after you've faded from the scene and we've resigned you to the ash heap of history. White media has begun to lose the ability to shape reality by dominating the public mind because people like me are taking that power away from the white media. White media is losing the ability to arbitrarily crown you candidate, and the black media has already made it clear that we will not support you as a candidate. We're attaching a real price to those who attack the black community and to those who refuse to promote our interests. We're making it where there's a price to be paid, a penalty to be paid, and the price is steep. And no amount of wrinkled up black elders and their stupid progeny who are sucking up to you in the hopes of getting a government job are going to be able to change that. Instead of wasting time talking to the 65 to dead black demo and the empty nothings like Negro Jim Clyburn, you should have been begging the black community for forgiveness. But you know what? That would require shame. And shame requires morality, decency, and honor. And I would never pretend that you possess those qualities.
But my mother used to say, you don't let people tell you who you are, you tell them who you are. So that's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm going to do.
No, Kamala, as much as you lie, the last thing we're going to do is to buy anything that comes off that forked tongue of yours. And I know they didn't teach you this in law school, but out here in the real world, actions speak far louder than words. Especially the words that come from a feculent, duplicitous con artist like yourself. 30 years of relentless attacks on the black community and non-stop defending of the police and prosecutors, that tells us you're a tool of white supremacy. And hiding behind your mother, who isn't even black, by the way, that's not going to shield you from criticism of being exposed and called out. You don't get to hide behind your mother's headstone. And notice how she says, I'ma. She gets that black scent on every once in a while. She decides to put on her fake black accent. I'ma. That's what I'ma do. Gee, does she talk like that in front of Asian people? Have you seen her talk like that in front of an Asian audience? Or in front of a white audience? By the way, I'll be showing you a couple of clips of that later on in the video essay. Kamala Harris damn sure didn't get on a black scent when she was at the debates. And in a minute, you'll see some more of Kamala's greatest hits. Ain't no ebonics on display then either. But the unthinking mob of morons at the NAACP, they weren't there for real policy debate or real policy discussion. They wouldn't even know what the hell that is. Those bunch of simple Simons, those unsophisticated rubes, those bunch of old clods, they were there for a luncheon. And did I tell you about that? You can hear the plates clattering, these morons eating. Same thing I told you about Big Bird. Well, I was at the Urban League winter luncheon where we held a bunch of morons sitting around eating and having some sort of resolution. I mean, come on, give me a break. But this was supposed to be passing as some sort of social activism by black people, and you wonder why nothing's gotten done in over 150 years. Now, finally, after all that wind up, that Kamala Harris went through, and after all the other feeble tactics that she'd used thus far that only appeal to the weak-minded and weak-willed, Kamala then gets to what she really wanted to say. And that was to take some shots at the new voices of black media, and I would say, at me in specific.
Because let me be clear. Self-appointed political commentators do not get to define who we are and what we believe.
Bitch.
And they do not get to define
Seriously,
what
bitch, they got
I
caught.
take my
And Professor Black Truth.
Well, this went from some sorry oratory to bad comedy quick, now didn't it? First of all, Kamala, that was you taking a shot at me, and I recognize it. But nonetheless, I think I can speak for the rest of the new voices of black media when I say that none of us are self-appointed. We are doing this job because nobody else will. And the people want us to. The black people want us to. We were not appointed by anyone because there is no one to appoint us. And commenting on politics, that's not something that I need to get your permission to do. And it ain't something that I can only do if the white media allows me to. The white media brings in a bunch of pre-vetted screen chumps who repeat the same brain-dead talking points. There is no actual political commentary, it's just political blathering. Well, that's not what I do. I built my following over the course of 12 plus years. I don't need anyone to give it to me because there was no one to give it to me. You, on the other hand, have been given everything you have. If there's a poster child for appointment, it would be Kamala Harris. Look back to the archives on this channel. I did an entire video essay about it. Willie Brown gave Kamala Harris a BMW, a do-nothing $100,000 a year government job, but there was no sex. That's the title of the video, by the way. It's in the archives of this channel. You see, Kamala Harris, you were appointed to be an assistant DA. You didn't earn it. It was an appointment. You were appointed to a patronage job on California's Medical Advisory Commission, even though the closest thing you had to medicine is a bottle of aspirin.
Okay, then.
You were appointed to the Unemployment Insurance Appeals Board in California, and I don't know what's more pathetic. Either needing Willie Horton to give you 2 patronage jobs, or the fact that you couldn't even be bothered to show up for either one of them. Kamala, when you ran for DA, your political cronies in San Francisco pulled strings to get you the job. When you ran for state attorney general, your political pals like Willie Brown again pulled strings to clear the field of competitors for you, and they did it again when you ran for the U.S. Senate. The only person who has been appointed to anything around here is you, Kamala Harris. You were appointed by Willie Brown, appointed by Nancy Pelosi, appointed by the rest of the California political machine. You have had every single post in your political life handed to you. Your entire life, such as it is, you have been the recipient of one appointment after the next. So I guess for you, living that kind of charmed existence, you can't understand what it's like to earn what you got. But those of us who happen to be the survivors of American slavery, those of us who are foundational black Americans, who came out of the killing fields of the American South, the only thing we know is how to get out here and grind. The only thing we know is how to scrape and claw for every crumb we get, because ain't nobody giving us anything. We're not white. If there's one thing you need to know about white folks, it's that they've had everything handed to them. See, as black folks, we know that nobody's given anything. But they're determined, well, you ain't going to get anything and we can help it. But the day is coming to an end when we'll be able to help it because we're bringing it to an end. The only person who has been the recipient of any appointments is Kamala Harris. The new voices of black media weren't appointed. We were chosen by the people. You're the one who had to be arbitrarily appointed because you would never have gotten it any other way. What Kamala is sour about is that the white media can't control what we say, and that we're having a real impact on the election. We're not part of any political or white media machine. So what that means is all bets are off. You can't just depend on Willie Brown pulling some strings or Nancy Pelosi putting in the good word for you. You California political machine doesn't have the ability to have a convenient media vacuum that they get to step into and say, well, here's the only voice black folks are here. They're hearing real voices. They're saying what the black folks have been saying the whole time. And you can't stand it. It eats you alive. You want the old black media. You don't want all of these unsanctioned black voices that are talking this real stuff. You want the black bootlegs, you want the roly-poly Martins, and the breakfast schlubs, and the Joy Reids, and the rest of the fakers, frauds, and phonies who have always sucked up to you and covered for you and never taken you to task. That's what you want. You want Big Bird to get his job back. And you want some softball interviews where they just tell you to list out your resume again. You don't want anyone actually questioning that resume. Yeah, Kamala, we know exactly what it is that you want. And the black masses don't want that at all. That's why we're here. That's why they support us and ain't supporting you. People are tired of the black bootlegs who never hold crooks like you accountable. Tired of having this fifth column inside the black community supported by white power that nobody ever points out and roots out. Tired of a white media that sings your undeserved praises and covers up your crimes against us. But most of all, Kamala Harris, black people are tired of you. Tired of the white power's hand-picked Negro minions who claim to be one of us, but who are actually the enemy within, attacking us day in and day out. And the new voices of black media do get to define what can be. Kamala Harris represents the old order. White power perpetuating itself by trotting out some hand-picked black flunky who gives minor, insincere lip service to our interests, but then turns right around and says, you think I'm going to do something that only benefits black people? No! Kamala, you will not tell black people what to be. You don't get to tell us anything. And you damn sure don't get to tell us whether or not we get reparations or intangibles or to see the police punished for attacking us. We're saying that that's going to happen, and you don't get to tell us what will be. You will not tell us whether we get to have our piece of the nation that we built. You don't get to tell us who we are, and neither does the white media. Kamala Harris wants white media-appointed political commentators. That's what she wants. She don't mind some appointed political commentators so long as they've been appointed by white power. I've been pointing out your half-ass maneuvering that you've done ever since you got elected senator when it was obvious that you were using the Obama playbook, grandstanding for the cameras every chance you could. And I, more than most, have been exposing your record, pointing out your improper and even illegal behavior and making sure that you don't get to run from it. Whether it's on YouTube or Twitter, whenever you launch one of your self-serving talking points, I would be there to shoot it down. And the B1 Brigade would be there to act as a signal booster for the message, a signal booster for the truth.
We all want to be safe. And what we don't want
These two men are
is
killers.
what we don't
The
want
worst
is
kind of
racial
killers.
profiling.
The kind that hide
Or
behind the wall.
chokeholds. Or mass incarceration.
You got a lot of nerve.
What we don't want is excessive force. Or being black to be considered probable cause. What we don't want is for a parent to have to sit down with their 12-year-old son and have the talk and explain to that child that he may be arrested, he may be stopped, he may be chased, or he may be shot because of the color of his skin.
Well, finally, Kamala actually said something truthful, but only because she's talking about what other people are saying and not herself. Okay, Kamala, granted, black folks do not want any of the things that you talked about, but all the things you listed are what you have allowed the police to do, and you supported them and protected them every step of the way. When the San Francisco Public Defender's Office
remember to
told you
loot.
hand over your
Remember
files
to
on
loot.
corrupt cops, you refused. When the courts told you to release low-level offenders because the prisoners were overcrowded to the point of violating the Constitution, you refused. And while you may have had
Fuck away from the ladies.
on
Get away from the ladies,
small
motherfucker.
numbers of police, you damn sure didn't do it when the public told
Didn't I
you
just
to.
say get away from the
Instead,
ladies?
you were defiant and
Like, go from the ladies,
and it was
motherfucker.
only when you saw
Good
that
shit.
the public pressure wasn't going to go away that you finally mandated body cameras, but for only a small handful of police under your first
Show your ass up out of here.
You want the body cameras to get out of hand. You don't want that becoming a trend.
These ladies ain't
All
no jump
the things
niggas.
that you list that black people don't want are either things that you directly did or things that you willingly helped to perpetuate. You could have stopped most, if not all, of these things from happening. Instead, your entire legal career, you've been the flunky and stooge of the white supremacist police state. You didn't check the police. You were an accessory to all their crimes.
Make sure y'all
Don't think we didn't notice how you never talk about punishing the police. She talks about what black folks want. When black folks say punch the police, all of a sudden, ooh, let's move right along. I'm not going to mention that. She talks about prosecutorial misconduct, but she doesn't talk about actually punishing prosecutors. The only remedy to police violence or even police misconduct is hard time. Hard time meaning 25 to life. Lock the bastards up and throw away the key. Prosecute police misconduct as a capital crime. But Kamala Harris ain't saying none of that. All those casual racists, read white moderates that she's trying to appeal to, she doesn't want them thinking that, oh, well, Kamala Harris, we pick up on the subtext. Yeah, we read between the lines. You weren't saying anything about punishment, so we get it. Okay, you're just saying this to mollify and pacify the dumb Negroes. But we know that things are going to go on as they always have. She's using the same vocabulary that people like Marsha Clark and people like Joe Biden and people like Dianne Feinstein use. Go ahead and reassure the casual racists that nothing's going to change. She says nothing about what the hell that she's ever done against police violence. What she's done, gee, if only she had run to be a prosecutor. Yeah, if Kamala Harris was a DA, then I bet you she could have done something about the police.
Damn, she take that over.
Kamala Harris run for Attorney General of California.
That's my baby mama right there, baby. She ran that bitch ass motherfucker over with no hesitation.
Why did she want to become a prosecutor?
She's like, no, you don't.
Wait.
And for the
Get
people,
that bitch ass nigga.
we
Get that
gave
bitch
voice
ass
to
nigga.
sexually exploited young women that the system only saw as teenage prostitutes. Those young women deserved protection. For the people, we cleared a backlog of rape
Yeah, I
kits
saw you
in the
run
state
that.
of
You ran that
40 million
motherfucker
people
over. That was
because
some good
those
shit.
women deserve
She ran
justice.
this bitch ass over. Get on the ground, nigga.
About another woman who also deserved
Did I
justice.
tell you? Nigga, I said get on the ground.
Patrice Richardson was arrested allegedly
Bitch
for
ass,
a
nigga.
car attack. Nice to see that the good white cops out of California attacked
Bitch
crimes.
ass. Where you at?
Police chose
Bitch
to
ass,
return
nigga.
dead middle of the night without a phone, without a car,
You
or
think
even a
this
wallet.
is bitch
And
ass,
she went
nigga?
missing soon thereafter.
Oh, no, you don't.
Last people to see her
Bitch
alive
ass, nigga.
For a year, her family tried to find out what happened to her. She just disappeared off the face of the earth for a year. Well, tragically, she was located, or rather, her body was found in a ravine some miles
Bring
from
your
the sheriff's
ass.
station. Her family says it was foul play. Kamala Harris was Attorney General at the time, and she refused to investigate in 2015.
Bring your
Gee,
ass.
whatever happened to black folks were always able
Bitch
to come to
ass,
Kamala
nigga.
Harris when they needed help. Black folks were always coming to Kamala Harris, but notice how she never said
Bitch ass, nigga.
interested in the concerns to solve the problems.
Bitch ass,
Black
nigga.
folks were always coming to.
Bring your punk ass over here, bitch ass,
She
nigga.
talked about that police misconduct needs to be investigated. She doesn't say it needs to be punished. She just says, we need to investigate. We need to investigate. But when
Hey,
it
let's put
comes
in
to
work,
black people
ladies.
accused of a crime, we need to punish. We need punishment, incarceration. We need to have swift and decisive punishment. Yeah, it's punishment for black folks, but not for white power. But Patrice Richardson's family, particularly her father, refused to give up. And in 2016, Kamala Harris's Attorney General's office was forced to say that they would investigate. They'd look into it, but this, of course, was just a phony baloney PR move. They didn't look into anything. They just came back to the family and said, well, there's not enough evidence for us to do anything to anyone. Yeah, we know that her body was mishandled, evidence surely lost, and that there's all kinds of suspicious activity about this. But, the statute of limitations is passed, and for any any sort of misconduct really, and so it doesn't matter. Now, in California, they pass laws simply because
bitch ass nigga.
We can't go after Bill Cosby, so we better pass some laws. We'll get the next nigger. I mean, the next Bill Cosby. See, when the statute of limitations was an obstacle to them getting a black person in jail, they decided to just move the goalpost. We're going to extend the statute of limitations now. But when the victim is black and the assailant is white, well, there's just nothing they can do. Nobody's trying to change any laws. Nobody's trying to do anything.
Where you think
A young woman is
bitch ass
the
nigga?
police and the state's investigators are culpable.
Damn, that was cold blooded.
Instead of seeking justice, Kamala Harris refuses to even look at it. And when she finally caves to public pressure, she quickly comes back and tells the family, well, there's just nothing we can do. So much for young women who deserve justice, huh?
For the people. We fought for elementary school students who are missing 50, 60, up to 80
You trying to
days
creep
of
up on somebody?
180-day school year.
You trying to creep up on somebody? Bitch ass nigga.
Statistics. When I learned that 40% of those children were missing over 10% of the school year, and that they were likely to drop
Bitch
out,
ass
and
nigga.
were likely to end up in
Bitch
jail
ass
or dead
nigga.
in the streets. Beautiful, smart children who, if they had lived in some rich neighborhood, the alarms would have gone off. Well, I refused to stand there and let the system fail them, and so I held the system accountable and got those children back in school, not by sending people to jail, but by getting families the resources they needed, because those children deserve justice.
Bitch ass nigga.
My family, there's more than a few lies here, but this is part of the cover her ass litany that she's been going through for some months now. Trying to find a way to rephrase and rewrite her own reprehensible record. First of all, it's ridiculous to talk about well-to-do families vis-a-vis the poor ones. Just say what it is. You're saying white families. She's doing everything she can to stay away from saying white and black. This while she's at the NAACP, mind you. But then again, they've been doing everything that they can to dodge racism too, so she's in good company. They certainly won't call her out for all of this forked-tongue doublespeak. White people are virtually immune from law, so there's no alarm bells that would go off for white children skipping school because no one is looking to prosecute white people for anything. Secondly, if Kamala Harris was actually interested in addressing white truancy in school, she damn sure wouldn't have shown up with prosecutors in tow threatening jail time. Oh, she wouldn't be coming at white folks like that, but she would come at the black ones like that, though. Gee, Kamala Harris seems to have suffered a sudden case of memory loss when it comes to how she handled truancy. She seems to have completely forgotten her own record and what it was she actually did. Well, fortunately, the internet is forever, so let's take a look back at a video from 2010, and let's see what Kamala Harris actually said 9 years ago, before she even thought about running for the presidency. Family, I gotta break in here.
And I believe a child going without an education is tantamount to a crime. So I decided I was going to start prosecuting parents for truancy. Well, this was a little controversial in San Francisco. And frankly, my staff went bananas.
Go ahead. Start looting these motherfuckers before we finish it, ladies.
You see what this heifer is doing?
There's a whole lot of little shit you can keep up.
Talking about putting children into the
Here, right here. Miss Lady.
Skipping school. And she's laughing about it. You see how she's
NY girl, here, right here. Grab this one. Loot him.
She's laughing like it's the funniest
No, this one.
This is
Loot this motherfucker.
Of a rational mind.
NY girl. Look at this motherfucker right here.
Twisted, sick, feeble, corrupt,
perverted
mentality.
This one.
You're getting a window into the thought processes of Kamala Harris. See, she was there at the Commonwealth Club. Nice little white group of talking heads. And these guys,
all these motherfuckers fucking around got that antique vodka.
She wasn't even thinking about running for Senate yet. She was still a general. So that being the case,
that's how you upgrade your money.
See this? Well, everyone's going to see it. And when she talks about what her fellow law degree carrying thugs thought about while all this was going on, not one of them said a word about the children or how this could affect their lives. This is by her own admission. The only thing Kamala Harris and her coterie of prosecutors could think about was whether or not this might affect her adversely in the next election.
That's some badass chicks I wrote with. Goddamn. We got 2 ravens and 1 redhead.
Kamala said about how
That's crazy. 2 ravens and 1 redhead.
don't know her motivations. Well, if we didn't know them before, we're definitely learning her motivations
Word
now.
feelers left.
She persecutes black people for fun and profit. To put her case by how she's laughing her butt off, she does it mostly for kicks and giggles, mostly for fun.
Well, past one day.
This is a serious issue, and I've got a little
See you
political
again.
capital, and I'm going to spend some.
Better next under better
Yes,
circumstances
Kamala,
than
this
trust.
is a serious issue, all right. You can tell by how funny she thinks it is. Also, that line about spending political capital, she was
Dang on yet?
W. Him and his Leave No Child Behind initiative. Nice to see who she takes her political cues from and that she's cut from the same cloth as George W. Bush.
And this is what we did. We recognized that in that initiative, as a prosecutor and law enforcement, I have a huge stick. The school district has got a carrot. Let's work in tandem around our collective objective and goal, which is to get those kids in school.
Again, Kamala gives a summary of how she intends to address truancy. But when she talks about how you have the school district and how you have the prosecutor's office together, notice who she doesn't mention as part of her equation. While she's listing who needs to be involved when it comes time to deal with truancy, she's putting together her dream team, her all-star team to deal with child truancy. We got the school board, and we got the prosecutors and the police, but notice who she doesn't mention. She doesn't mention the parents or their children. As far as she's concerned, well, they shouldn't have any say in this. After all, this is something that's going to be done to them, not something being done for them. This is a prosecutor laying out an us versus them agenda, and us versus them mentality. This is what she was talking like 9 years ago. She doesn't sound a damn thing like this today, does she?
Nope.
Oh, but it gets worse.
So, to that end, on my letterhead, now let me tell you something about my letterhead. When you're the DA of a major city in this country, usually the job comes with a badge. And there is often an artistic rendering of said badge on your stationery. So, I sent a letter out on my letterhead to every parent in the school district, outlining the connection that was statistically proven between elementary school truancy, high school dropouts, who will become a victim of crime, and who will become a perpetrator of crime.
She smiles and laughs while she talks about how she has a badge. See, these clowns, they don't look at themselves as being some sort of courtroom representatives. They look at themselves as being cops with law degrees. And she also likes to toss around letters with statistics on it. I was sending out letters that had statistics on it. Now, how much you want to bet that her statistics came from some white think tank? I've already told you about what those white think tanks are on and where they're coming from. Because just like them, she doesn't mention statistics merely for conversation. She does it as a justification, a way to intellectualize and to rationalize the punitive action that she's preparing to take. She lists the statistics. Oh, we gotta do something about these niggers out here. Look at the statistics. Look at the statistics. We gotta do something. Kamala Harris, in word and in deed, operates exactly like every other white supremacist that you've ever heard of or seen in government.
We sent it out to everyone. A friend of mine actually called me and he said, Kamala, my wife got the letter. She freaked out. She brought all the kids into the living room, held up the letter, said, if you don't go to school, Kamala's going to put you and me in jail. Yes, bitch, you intended effect.
Now, I want you guys to see this. You see how long she's been laughing about this? The more she talks about it, it's uncontrollable. She just is endlessly tickled by this. She can barely continue her BS-laden speech because she has to stop and laugh her butt off. This piece of trash thinks that what vice president. She sends out letters to all the parents because a relative handful of children are skipping school. Now, you know why the prisons in California were overflowing on her watch. Today, she acts like she wants to stop this, but as you can see, she was one of the main reasons that prison overcrowding was happening in the first place. Now, imagine this cackling witch with the power to issue her own executive orders.
And here's what we also did. We created what we call the DA mediation program, where we assigned prosecutors to go and sit with the administrators and principals when they met with all the parents. And frankly, you know the prosecutors in my office who volunteered to do this? My homicide prosecutors, my gang prosecutors. And they went over there and I said, when you go over there, look really mean. And so they did, and invariably the parents said, well, who's the mean-looking dude? And the principal would say, well, that's someone that mean DA Kamala Harris sent over here because she said she's going to start prosecuting you if we can't work this out.
Well, nice to see that Kamala finally found the time to work the parents and kids into her brilliant little scheme. Oh, but family, it gets even worse.
And through that initiative, we found cases like the case of the woman who was by herself, raising her 3 children, holding down 2 jobs, and homeless. She just needs help. But by shining this infrared spotlight of public safety on the fact that her children aren't in school, we were able to figure that out. Give her access to services that exist. And through that process, the attendance of her children improved. We dismissed the charges against her. And overall, we've improved attendance for this population in San Francisco by 20% over the last 2 years.
Family, did you get that last part?
Yeah.
Go back and rewind so you can listen to it again. Did you get that last part? She said that ultimately they dismissed the charges against this homeless woman. They did it in the end. They did. First question is, why the hell did they charge her at all? She wants someone to pat her on the back. Well, now we did drop the charges later. Wait a minute. This is a homeless woman, for God's sake, with her kids on the street. What are you doing charging her with anything in the first place? And you notice how she left that part to the very end of her story. As a footnote, she blew by it at 100 miles an hour and didn't come back to it. Kamala Harris didn't even attempt to help this woman. She's homeless on the streets with her children. No one's helping her. She's working a job and can't keep a roof over her head because in California it's just too much. This is one of the people who fell through the cracks. She doesn't need prosecution. She needs help. Don't you think she has enough pressure on her already? People who are homeless have lost everything. The kids don't have a stable home life because they don't have a home. But Kamala Harris didn't think to call up downtown Willie Brown. She didn't think to call Nancy Pelosi and tell all of her well-heeled California political connections to pull some strings and try to help this homeless woman and her children. That's not the first thing that came to Kamala Harris's mind. Her first impulse wasn't, this is a person, a human being who needs my help, and I'm in a position now where I can call some shots. And hey, I've come up through the ranks of the political machine. If there's ever a time to have some strings pulled in someone's favor, instead of trying to give me a patronage job, let's give this woman a real job. Let's find out a way to get this woman a roof over her head. That ain't what Kamala Harris was thinking. That's not what her first impulse was. Her first impulse, let me get some kicks and giggles, just for funsies. I'm going to put some charges on her because her kids missed school. Let's get tough with this homeless woman. Somebody needs to get tough with all these homeless people. That was her first impulse. A homeless woman with children on the streets. And Kamala Harris decides, well, she needs to be in prison. And just to show you that she hasn't got any new material, here's some examples of her old, worn-out talking points. Many of these are a decade old now, and they haven't gotten better with age, by the way.
Well, I would suggest to you that being smart on crime means realizing we cannot accept false choices. One is not to the exclusion of the other. I demanded that we reject a false choice that suggests on criminal justice policy you're either tough on crime or you're soft on crime. And instead I said we need to be smart on crime. I would suggest that we should think of it in a way that also appreciates the false choices that have been presented. And in particular, not only the false choice about whether there has to be some trade-off between civil liberties and civil rights if we're to have public safety, but also a false choice in general that says on criminal justice policy, you're either soft on crime or you're tough on crime. I suggest we instead ask, are we being smart on crime?
She sure does love that phrase, false choices. You know, kind of like saying that you have to choose between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. That's a false choice. You can choose not to support either one of these bastards. You see, Kamala Harris loves presenting people with false choices, as long as she thinks she's going to get something out of it. Well, Professor Black Truth is here to tell you, you ain't got to listen to Kamala Harris and her false choices. You got other choices that she ain't going to tell you about because they would empower you and not her. I could go ahead and answer that last little bit of rhetoric from her. No, Kamala, you are not being smart on crime. You're not being smart at all, because white supremacy and the cheap, vile, anti-black racism you represent is dumb as hell. And notice how she uses that phrase public safety repeatedly, too. That's her clever way of saying law and order. It's dog whistle language to the casual racist, read white moderates.
My sister Maya and I were raised by a mother who was all of 5 feet tall. But if you had ever met her, you would have thought she was 7 feet tall. And our mother was the kind of parent who, if you ever came home complaining about something, she would look at you, often with one hand on her hip, and say, well, what are you going to do about it?
All right, here we've gone back to her black scent again. What you gonna do about it? Kamala's mother was from India, not Inglewood. Kamala's mother was a professional with a PhD in endocrinology. Do you truly believe that an immigrant from India with an Ivy League degree was putting her hand on her hip and saying, well, what you gonna do about it? This is what Kamala Harris does in front of black people when it's obvious that her mother was nothing like that. Yet Kamala insists on talking about her mother as if she was some sort of big mama archetype or something. Her mother was not some church-going, cornbread-cooking soul sister from the neighborhood. Her mother was a Desi Indian who the only contact she allegedly had with a black person was sex with Kamala's father. And that's assuming that her father is black and not some dark-skinned Indian. And my jury is still out on that one. And you know she wouldn't go in front of an Asian audience or a white audience characterizing her mother like that. Why, if she were talking to some white folks, or especially Asians, she would characterize her mother as speaking the king's English perfectly. You know, this kind of patronizing pandering reminds me of Barack Obama and how he never got tired of taking slick shots at black men while he was on the campaign trail, but just to make all of that anti-black bile a little bit easier to swallow, he would go ahead and lapse into a black scent for a little bit. Kamala Harris, on the other hand, has no qualms about stereotyping black people. She stereotyped Jamaicans as a whole as being just a bunch of weed smokers, and now she's stereotyping black women as not being able to speak the language properly. This is patronizing. It's condescending to black people for her to do this, and for her, it's hilarious. As far as she's concerned, I got these morons eating out of my hand. Well, she's got the brain-dead fools over at the NAACP eating out of her hand. The black media is being nowhere near so solicitous. But Kamala Harris doesn't see herself as a black woman. That's just a label that she likes to use because she wants to take advantage of gains that we fought for, which were meant for us and not for her. She thinks that she can use black people in every way possible.
Do you know the challenge for every law enforcement leader, every elected district attorney, every elected sheriff? The challenge and the concern, the fear, always, is that we will do something with that low-level offender that might be about education and less incarceration, job training, mental health, and that person will go out tomorrow and kill a baby and a grandmother. And then everyone will look at us and they will say, Madam District Attorney, Mr. Police Chief, Mr. Sheriff, why did you do something different with them when you had them?
This one's another lie. She said this in 2012, by the way, and the U.S. had then and still today the largest prison population on Earth. So for Kamala Harris to act like the police and the DAs are somehow trying to find a way not to lock people up, that's a joke and not a very funny one.
Man.
Unless you're talking about white offenders. Dylan Roof was caught at a mall with drugs on him, and he should never have been able to get past an FBI background check and get his hands on a firearm, but he did. They let him sail right through. When he should never have been able to pass a background check. You see anyone making a big stink about that? Where's all this public outrage at the police and the authorities for failing to stop a mass murderer that Kamala Harris is talking about? You want to talk about people who are let go for low-level offenses and come back and kill some people? Dylan Roof would be the poster child for that. Brock Turner raped a woman and the judge let him go. I personally have done a ton of videos chronicling how white offenders commit tons of crimes but never get punished until they kill multiple people. So when Kamala Harris talks about her hypothetical low-level offender who the authorities are so anxiety-ridden about trying to rehabilitate instead of incarcerate, that's just her windbag way of saying black. A term which she goes to great lengths to avoid using unless absolutely necessary. By the way, watch her interviews. She doesn't say white flight. She instead says flight by certain families. Same way that earlier in this video essay, I pointed out how she said well-to-do families instead of just saying white families. Yeah, because we wouldn't want the casual racist to feel like anyone's putting them on the spot. But just in case you thought her disrespect was limited only to black people, look at how Harris characterizes people who push for resources to go to schools instead of building prisons.
Okay, so I say with all love and warmth that part of the concern also for people who are progressive thinking and liberal-minded, or just progressive thinking in terms of just fix it, is that we all have these posters in our closet that is attached to a stick that we sometimes will card out when we're talking about criminal justice policy and those statistics that you first heard when we opened it up, incarceration. And we run around with these signs, build more schools, less jails. Build more schools, less jails. And we walk around everywhere, build more schools, we protest, build more schools, less jails. Put money into education, not prisons. There's a fundamental problem with that approach, in my opinion. And it's this. I agree with that conceptually. But you have not addressed the reason I have 3 padlocks on my front door. So part of the discussion about reform of criminal justice policy has to be an acknowledgement that crime does occur. And especially when it is violent crime and serious crime. Well, there should be a broad consensus that there should be serious and severe and swift consequence to crime.
Get that, folks? Sean Hannity and the rest of the clowns over at the False News Network or any other right-wing hate radio pundit that you heard of couldn't have said it better than that. This is a woman who's from California, who to hear her tell it, oh, she is just so progressive-minded, but she ridicules the progressive. Now, she doesn't ridicule the right wing like that. She doesn't ridicule them and hold them up for scorn. But she will do it for the people who are saying put money into schools instead of prisons. Because it's a fact that for every school you close down, you got to build a prison. Notice how that's a statistic that Kamala Harris never manages to actually say. Oh, she'll tell statistics about truancy rates. But when it comes to the fact that in many cases the kids are not even able to go to schools because the school's been shut down, and how that directly leads to those kids going to prison, well, she's not mentioning that. She doesn't mention that. That's a statistic that never comes up.
Because you see, when we engage in innovation in law enforcement, it necessarily means we're doing something different with somebody who's on our screen, on our radar. And the only reason they're probably there is because they committed some kind of crime. So part of what is then involved in innovation in law enforcement is a high assumption of risk. And part of what I would suggest we need to do to encourage more innovation in law enforcement is set the table and the plate as a society, as opinion leaders, sometimes as the voting public to say we encourage you to do that. And we understand how innovation works. I am a native Californian. I'm very proud of what we do in California, including what we're doing in Silicon Valley. Well, the culture there is very clear. And, my mother was a scientist, so I have a full appreciation for what scientists and engineers do. I grew up in a household where the word hypothesis was used all the time. Okay? So, when you run for elected office, however, you are expected to have the plan. Capital T, capital P. The plan. And then you roll out the plan, and you defend the plan no matter what its defects, because you had the plan, and so it must be defended. Versus what innovation understands. Let's start with a hypothesis. Now make sure it's well-intentioned, well thought out, well-planned. But what we know in every situation of ours, when we roll it out for the first time, there will be a glitch. But we have accepted that in places like Silicon Valley as part of the culture. We expect there will be a glitch. Don't make the same mistake twice, please. But then go, reconfigure, and let's tweak it and improve it and roll it out the next time. The luxury of that experience, the reality of that process, is not afforded to people who, generally speaking, are in elected office or law enforcement leaders. So part of what needs to happen is we need to give law enforcement the ability to try out, experiment, and then give them a little capital, a little space to say, okay, there may be a glitch, fix it, let's reconfigure. Another challenge I think we have when it comes to innovation in law enforcement and therefore in criminal justice is the way that we have approached the issue, which has mostly been centered on the criminal case instead of the crime problem. So I'm a career prosecutor. You heard stories about specific cases, and then we heard statistics in general. So, when I was a career prosecutor, I was handed a file. Sexual rights by and child sexual assault, some of the worst crimes you can imagine. My only focus when I got that file was that case, and I'll tell you, if I was ever a vigilante DA, it was in that case. Lock this person up because I believe the facts are here and the evidence is here to prove him guilty. That is the right approach for the criminal case. It's a very different situation. When as the elected DA for 2 terms in San Francisco, and now the chief elected law enforcement officer of the biggest state in the country, when I think about the crime problem, very different from the criminal case. But for too long we have allowed criminal justice policy to evolve around a specific case. So what ends up happening is we have a conversation that is fueled by what we feel here, rightly, our concerns here, rightly, our fears here, based on that case, instead of looking at the numbers that you've heard already. So part of the shift has to involve, one, identifying how we have approached it, and realizing that, as I know it as a career prosecutor, I see crime as on a pyramid. At the very top of the pyramid, the worst crime. There for obvious reason, homicide, child molestation, the worst cases you can imagine. They're there at the top of the pyramid because they are the most outrageous of offense. The cost to the victim and the community is great, and it needs to be a priority. Thankfully, at the top of the pyramid, also the fewest number. What is occupying the bulk of what is in the criminal justice system is at the middle and base of that pyramid. But we have approached a one-size-fits-all approach to crime, even though crime is not monolithic. I would suggest we could make great advances just by having people automatically, when they hear, and Eva did such a beautiful job of just showing us images and then challenging us in terms of what our immediate reaction is. I think we could go a very far distance if the immediate reaction the general public had to criminal justice policy discussions would be to say, okay, wait a minute, you person running for office or whoever else, are you talking to me about violent crime or nonviolent crime? Let's just start there. Just as a beginning, let's bifurcate our brains and our thoughts into, is it violent crime or nonviolent crime? Understanding that, generally speaking, the approach should be different. We can't have a knee-jerk response that's lock them up to every type of crime as though they are monolithic or it's a monolith. The other piece of it is this. So yes, I've already shared with you, I was born in Oakland, California. My parents were there at Berkeley in the 60s. I have friends like Eva Patterson.
No, this is a very different Kamala Harris from 10 years ago than the one that we're seeing today. The Kamala Harris that we're seeing today, she doesn't talk anything like she did in the past. She doesn't talk like this for her TV interviews either, but this Kamala Harris's real position on the issues lets you know exactly where she's coming from. And it goes a long way towards explaining why she went to the mat to keep low-level, non-violent offenders from being released on their own recognizance just to relieve the prison overcrowding. Even after the courts told her to do it, she still said, I ain't doing it. See, it's not risk of recidivism or risk of committing some higher crime that she's concerned about, because she didn't have a word to say about Brock Turner, and she was Attorney General at the time that he was let loose, and she hasn't said a word about Brock Turner since, by the way. Hasn't proposed any legislation to make sure the next Brock Turner don't get off the hook. So when it comes to white kids skipping school or white offenders raping people, Kamala Harris sees no evil and speaks no evil. People are rediscovering Kamala's real motivations and her real thoughts and her real actions. And she's trying to tell us that we didn't see and hear what we clearly saw and heard. Kamala Harris knows exactly what her job is, and that's to justify prosecutorial targeting of black people. She never points out prosecutors who are doing wrong, and every argument she makes does nothing more than reinforce the same lies that DAs and state's attorneys have been saying in this country since time immemorial. All she is here to do is to put a friendly face on the prosecutorial anti-black rhetoric. That's her job, to put a friendly face to it. I'll lock you up with a smile and a laugh. Lots of laughing, especially if it's children that she's locking up. Kamala Harris is attempting to use the Obama playbook. She'll play tough in front of the camera for Senate hearings whenever there's some sort of hot-button issue. And she'll try to get black support by pretending to be interested in black people. Obama went to New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina and then promptly turned his back on the black community afterwards. And Kamala Harris, I guess, is trying to distinguish herself from the pack, I suppose. But she understands that her job is to support white supremacy. She's trying to trick you into looking the other way in regards to her record, and looking the other way in regards to the real harm that she's done to black folks and continues to do. And while Kamala Harris herself does not consider herself to be a black woman, she does know that there's a very active voting bloc in this country who would be willing to mobilize for a black candidate who pretends to be on their side. So here she is coming along going, oh, I've got some black ancestry, don't you know? Well, so does Alexandria Cortez, but at least Alexandria Cortez has the decency to say that doesn't make me black. Well, at least as far as for purposes of demographics goes. But if she thought the reparations would become a reality, and if she had to claim black ancestry to do it, all of a sudden she'd bring that out. Well, I got some black ancestors, but that doesn't make me black. Kamala Harris is perpetrating a fraud. This is not some comeback that she's on the way to, but the white media is hoping to reinflate the burst balloon of her political dreams. We gotta make it clear that when the black media exposes someone, we stomp on your campaign, that means it stays stomped. And no, we're not gonna let the white media just claim on their own authority that Kamala Harris is back. Oh, she had a stellar showing and all this. No, you ain't going to be tricking black folks into thinking, oh, she criticized Joe Biden. Actually, she didn't really criticize him. She just did the hearts thing we all do. You feel my pain? I was hurt. I was really hurt. It was so painful for you to, oh, God, she's doing that white glove where professional courtesy stuff. Can't be busting up Joe Biden too badly. After all, it's all of us insiders against these black outsiders. That's the game Kamala Harris is playing. She's pretending to give voice to what black people think about Joe Biden's record without actually pointing out the fact that when it comes to children being separated from their parents, you ain't got to go to the border to find that, and you didn't have to wait for Donald Trump to separate children from their parents. Kamala Harris was doing it long before Trump. And at least Donald Trump doesn't laugh and howl about it. He doesn't sit there and guffaw and laugh like some sort of mad scientist. Kamala Harris does. Talking about separating families, Kamala Harris, she thinks it's the funniest thing on earth. This is the evil that we're up against here. White supremacy chooses these demented, degenerate minds in order to try to unleash them on us. This is what we're up against. We face an evil greater than any the world has ever known. And make no mistake, white supremacy is stronger than any evil that's ever existed before. But it is not stronger than us. Black empowerment is the cure to white supremacy, but we have to be aggressive about administering it. We cannot wait for the white media to discover religion. They are the mouthpiece of official white power. The white media will try to see if they can reach enough black people with their media reach in order to lie to them and tell them, no, you can, look, Kamala Harris is taking on Joe Biden, and that means something. Hey, you heard those new voices of black media that were skinning the hide off of Joe Biden? Well, Kamala Harris is saying some similar things, kind of sort of around the way, or kind of beating around the bush, no, doing an end run, more or less. But she's kind of sort of talking about it, so that means you're going to vote for it, right? That's what they're trying to do. If we don't confront these scumbags with their record, no one's going to do it. If we do not get in their faces and stay in their faces, no one else is going to do it. By we, I mean all of us. There's no way that any one voice of black media can be in all places at all times. But
say goodbye to your head.
Mobilize, be one brigade. Nobody has to be. None of us has to be. We just have to know that as soon as these clowns come to somewhere within our vicinity, out comes the cell phone cameras. By the way, for future reference, make sure that you hold your cell phone camera sideways. The image will be about the size of a postage stamp if you just hold it up vertically. Make sure that the phone is held horizontally. This is not something that's simply being seen on Twitter or being seen on Instagram. This is something the whole world can see, but you got to be ready and you got to do it right. Let's show people that we're a new breed. So get your cell phone camera out and turn it sideways. And ask the tough questions and let them know we ain't going away. You will be told about these reparations. You will be told about your reprehensible record. We are not fooled and we're not relenting. We're not giving up and we ain't shutting up. And we're damn sure not sitting down.
Infinite, where's your horse at? Oh, I'm about to say, I'm like, damn, nigga, you really gonna try to run that motherfucker off? That's gonna be a hell of a thing, player.
White supremacy, that's going to come out to all of it.
Alright, player.
It is not the job of the white media to confront these political frauds. That's our job. It's not the job of the white media to promote reparations, to promote tangibles, to make sure that we firmly define foundational black Americans so that people like Kamala Harris don't get to claim to be one of us. It is our job to define us, not theirs. And they will try to define us because that's what power is. It's the ability to define yourself and to define your relationship to those around you in such a way that your definition becomes theirs. They're trying to push back. They saw that we are asserting ourselves. We're defining ourselves and in the process robbing white supremacy of one of the essential pillars of its power, the ability to define its relationship to us and them. And that means they get to define who we are because we've accepted it. But there are those of us who are agitating saying we accept this no longer. And it don't matter how many bootlicks you get from the old black media or how many civil rights retreads you trot out like John Lewis and Negro Jim Clyburn. And it doesn't matter how many of these desiccated, decaying black fossils like the NAACP, yet another professional do-nothing organization. It doesn't matter how many of them you trot out. The black media has been reborn. The new voices of black media are here, completely and thoroughly unsanctioned and unappointed. Thank you, Kamala. So that's what I think about the Democratic primary debates. That's what I think about the ones that are taking place. Complete fraud, waste of time. That's why I didn't bother wasting it. There was nothing to see here. And Kamala Harris's pathetic attempt to try to resurrect her campaign isn't going to work because ultimately the white media doesn't have the ability to define whether or not black folks turn out in numbers. Increasingly, it's the black media that does that. And Kamala Harris, we're not supporting her in a million years. White media has the ability to praise her, but they don't have the ability to elect her. number 23 jersey.
Correcting the past often means also imposing some consequences for people who are not directly responsible for what happened in the past, but were the indirect beneficiaries of what happened in the past. And that vastly complicates the resolution of such issues.
There was a good reason that I started off with that quote from Zbigniew Brzezinski. Not merely because he was a white man, but because he was also an immigrant, as noted on the image. This whole subject about what it is that black people are owed, it's coming to a boil mainly because there's a refinement going on here. That's how power works. Power is continually in the process of refining itself, purifying itself. You take some gold out of the ground, and what happens is you gotta smelt it, you gotta throw it in a furnace, because you gotta separate the gold from the dross. And that's what's going on right now. This is not to say that we are trying to separate ourselves from the rest of the African diaspora.
Far from it. We've been repping black while everybody else has been running from it.
All the rest of these folks from the sons and daughters of Africa from outside the United States have been trying to call themselves everything else except black. They were trying to separate themselves from us. We never tried to separate ourselves from them.
So let's get that shit straight.
Absolutely crystal clear. We are not trying to separate ourselves from the rest of the African diaspora. We are attempting to clarify our place in the African diaspora. What we are doing right now is no different than what you saw Jews doing. They didn't say that we're not white people. What they were saying was, well, we need to clarify the position that Jews hold among the Europeans, among the Caucasians. We want to make it clear where we stand, what we are, and what it is that we're about. And that's what we're doing as well, so that we don't have any confusion. So that people who call themselves, whether it's in the United States, some of these foreign-born black people or foreign-descended black people, or those who we meet in their home countries, we don't want them getting us wrong. And when they come over here, we definitely don't want them getting us wrong. Everybody needs to be clear. We're hitting the reset button so that we can have clarity. You're going to be hearing a whole lot of us throwing the words of all of these other non-black groups and non-foreign, non-domestic born black people in their faces as far as what black people are owed. Expect to be hearing and seeing a lot of that. All of these people have been running around making all kinds of justifications for why the Jews should get reparations for a crime that happened in Europe. Or, in the case of Zbigniew Brzezinski, that little clip that I played for you, that was taken from Zbigniew Brzezinski commenting on the Ukraine. That's where that's from. He was talking about the Ukraine's future and what can be done to try to settle some of those old ethnic antagonisms. That's what a white man was saying about other white people, what they can do amongst themselves. You see, everybody's entitled to reparations except for black people, because white supremacy has turned the world on its head. White supremacy has misshapen and perverted and twisted the entire global order into nothing more than a racialist pyramid scheme with black people at the bottom. And what started off at first was for the European to steal everything that wasn't bolted down or on fire. And starting about 130 years ago, the European decided to switch to phase 2 of the white supremacist project, which was to freeze the world the way that it is, to ensure that the European never loses the position with which he emerged from imperialism. And this has had it's had a number of different iterations throughout the last 120 to 130 years. Starting off with the Vienna Conference, then going into the ill-fated League of Nations, then coming out of the Second World War, you had Bretton Woods, the European Union, and the Project for a New American Century and such. These are all just different names for the exact same agenda, which is to make sure that white people don't lose their position. Because all that stuff that these folks were doing, they were not concerned about the rest of the world. They were only concerned about white folks and how to make sure that white people stayed on code. And part of being on code means you ain't sitting here shooting each other, having knockdown dragouts about which one of y'all is going to be ruling over everyone else. That's not the kind of thing that's productive. So the European, because of the fact that he's never been able to get along with anyone, not even himself, of course it was going to boil over. Of course these guys were going to have a go at each other. That's what they were doing before they were able to break through the Moorish blockade and get down into Africa in the late 15th century. These guys have spent the better part of 1,000 years since the Romans left, just basically having a go at each other. Now, for those of us whose ancestors were caught up in the slavery experience, what does this have to do with us? We were wronged. We are the most wronged and righteously aggrieved people on the planet. And there are a lot of people who have been eating off of our deprivation, eating off of our poverty, who've been having a damn good time filling their bellies at our expense. And what they figured was that the day would never come that a critical mass of black people would ever put their heads together, put their differences aside, and decide that they were going to pursue a black first agenda. But we need to be very clear. When we say black first, we're not at the point yet where we have the resources or where we have the political wherewithal to be able to impose black empowerment outside of our sphere. Make no mistake, you go to Jamaica, you ain't gonna be, take a look at Jamaica. Ain't a damn thing black empowerment happening down there. Haiti, you gotta say more. And you can sit there and say that Brazil has more black people than any place outside of Africa, but you go down to Brazil, these guys are dysfunctional as well. And there's a lot of black folks in South America. There's a lot of black people who got caught up in the slavery experience, but very few of them reacted the way that we did. Black empowerment is not something that's going to come naturally to the rest of the diaspora. We are going to wind up having to impose it on them, because I keep pointing out, this is not new. Shaka Zulu had to do the exact same thing. Time ran out for him. Let us pray that it does not run out for us. But the Europeans have been watching us. He's seeing that the threat that he failed to deal with 160 years ago, now this threat has grown and is beginning to coalesce and is beginning to magnify itself. He's got a big problem on his hands. We are a political problem. And he's decided that he was going to pursue a strategy of drowning us out of existence. At first, bring in a whole bunch of his kith and kin from Europe. Didn't have enough of them to bring in, so he started bringing in folks from Southern Europe, people who were not considered to be white at all. But go ahead and give them the political designation white so that they'll be on the team. They won't be accepted, but the point is they'll toe the line. That's really all that matters. And Hispanics were among that group. And then when that wasn't enough, we'll bring in a bunch of foreign-born Asians. We're just going to drown these slave descendants in a whole bunch of foreigners. And the whole point is going to be this is a mass political operation geared toward trying to give us political cover to say, well, what you slavery descendants, what you guys have to say, that doesn't really mean much because we've got all these other groups here and they don't have the same gripes as you guys. So, nobody's concerns are really more important than anyone else's. Your concerns are certainly no better and certainly no more important than anyone else's. And this is deliberate because these other groups, they're still a tiny minority of the population. We, on the other hand, represent 1 out of 7 people in the country. So trying to drown us is a political operation meant to solve the political threat that we pose. We put the lie to all of it. In prior civilizations, whenever you had a slave population, when the slave population's usefulness had been expended, they were exterminated. This had happened without fail in every civilization in the world. Well, at least in Europe and Asia anyway. Africa, you might have a couple of hoots and hollers, but no wholesale attempt to wipe out an entire group because slavery wasn't really the same in Africa. To the extent that it existed, the Africans did not use any sort of indentured servitude the way that the Europeans and the Asians did. So let's not get it twisted. But in every other instance where you had an enslaved population, at the end, they were exterminated. Because you didn't want to have these guys hanging around because the work that they were doing was not meant to enrich them. It was meant to enrich the oppressor's civilization. So you got to kill them when it's all over, and that solves the problem. Hell, even Richard Spencer talked about that. You're supposed to get rid of them when it's over. That didn't happen here. We put up too big a fight. And before it was all over, well, now the slaves are still here. Well, damn. And there's too many people watching now. And these slaves have come to do quite a bit to influence what people think of as this country. Man, we can't kill them without basically contradicting everything we claim to stand for. White supremacy is an idea, and the lies that white supremacy uses to try to justify itself and try to pretend like it's not the evil that it clearly is, that's also an idea. So they're stuck on the horns of a dilemma. This is what Thomas Jefferson meant when he said, we have a tiger by the ears, and we can neither safely hold him nor let him go. We're not going to stop what we're doing, but at the same time, we don't know how the hell to keep this up. So where in the world do all these foreigners come into play? They have been the indirect, and in many cases, direct beneficiaries of our enslavement. Everything that we built that has gone to enrich everyone except for ourselves. We are owed, and the bill is due. Time to pay up, sucker, the rent's due. And yes, it is going to be to the tune of trillions of dollars, because those individuals who have become rich off of us, look at how much richer they become over the last 350 to 400 years. They didn't make chump change. They became the most powerful and most opulent and wealthiest nation in human history. That means the reparations that go to their victims will be the biggest in human history. And all of these immigrants, I don't give a damn where they come from. If they come from Mexico or whether they come from Mali, if they come from Washington or if they come from the far side of Guangzhou, I don't give a damn where the hell they come from. Once they come over here in the United States, they have volunteered to pay that debt, because not a damn one of those immigrants can claim that they didn't know what they were getting into. Every one of them knew what they were getting into. But what they also knew was that black people were paving the way to try to make this country, at least on occasion, act like something resembling civilization. When you think about the United States of America, especially what it means for people who are not white males, it comes down to the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments and the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to 65. Those were not the results of Asians. There weren't enough of them here, and the few of them who might have been here at the end of the 19th century, they weren't fighting for anything. It wasn't the result of Hispanics either. From the Mexican-American War all the way to the present, these guys have not been doing anything except for dreaming of the old days and pretending that they were Spaniards. It ain't the result of Arabs or Indians or Native Americans or these foreign-born blacks. It was the result of those of us who were here, those of us whose ancestors were dying and suffering in the hells of North America. We made the United States. Whatever good it is you think of the U.S., we are responsible for that. We and we alone. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were not the result of white folks having a come-to-Jesus moment. They didn't do it out of the goodness of their own hearts. If they did, what the hell were they up to for the previous 300 years then? No, they did it because we faced them with a political dilemma and they had no other way out. We put their backs to the wall, and it was a matter of, you've already had one civil war. If you don't come down on the right side of history this time, you're in for a second one. They say, okay, fine, then. It was political necessity. A necessity that we brought about. No one else. Not a brag, just a historical fact. We're equating people with the history now. And we're letting people know that we are a unique people. We are a special people, a people apart. We are an exceptional group. And what was done to us has never been done to anyone in the history of the world. Hence, what we are due is beyond anything that any other group of people are due. And as for these immigrants who have come in, you guys owe us too. In fact, you owe us more than everyone else, because at least with the good white folks who were here beforehand, these guys, they were being a bunch of honest thieves. These immigrants who came in, they were being nothing more than a bunch of base opportunists. They came in, they saw how we were being treated, and they threw in their lot with the oppressors, and then they want to have it both ways. At least the white supremacists, the indigenous white supremacists, native white supremacists here, at least he knows what he's doing is wrong. These other groups saw it, said that it was wrong, and then said, you know what, we're going to help you out anyway. We're going to help out the white supremacists anyway. I just love it when you got some good white folks today, or better yet, you got some of these immigrants who want to try to pretend as if, I shouldn't owe anything. Let me tell you something. This is a message. In fact, this is the entire reason for tonight's video essay. I got something to say to all of you foreign-born folks, or you descendants of foreigners, like Joy Reid, and Angela Rye, and Roly-Poly Martin, and Kamala Harris, and every one of you who happen to either be immigrants or the children of immigrants. You are not going to get away with that con game of, well, I wasn't any part of this. I just showed up yesterday. Yeah, why the hell are you here? You're here because this is a land of opportunity. There are vast economic resources. Yes, economic resources that were only made possible because of my people. You don't get to take credit for that. You weren't part of that. The only reason why this empire of liberty, this bastion of capitalism, free market nonsense, whatever you want to call it, even exists, is because we made it possible. It could not have stored up and stockpiled the wealth that it had if it hadn't been for us. That was our doing, not yours. So when you come over here calling yourself trying to get a piece of the action, you're trying to get a piece of our action. And the thing about it is, you want a piece of the action, you got to pay full freight for it. Oh, you weren't responsible for slavery. You weren't responsible for Jim Crow. You weren't responsible for the black codes. Yeah, but you damn well been eating off of it now, haven't you? For these foreigners to call themselves running up in here and then claiming no responsibility, that they owe no debt to black people, you're a damn lie. You owe as big a debt as the most dyed-in-the-wool white supremacist. It's no different than if you try to buy a house. You call yourself wanting a house. You look and say, I like the 2-car garage. I like the 3.5 baths. I like the nice basement that doesn't smell too much like mold. I like the new carpeting and all the rest of it. And oh, it's got such nice acoustics. And the place, it is so well insulated. Well, if you want all of that, if you like what that house has to offer because it's better than the other houses on the block, well, there's going to have to be some responsibility for any outstanding liens on that home. If that home has any debts against it, you also are responsible for that too. So if you call yourself liking all the nice amenities that the house has, you like the fact that it's got 2 stories, you like the circular driveway, you like the fact that it's a smart home, and it's got an internal intercom system, you like all that great stuff, then you got to go along with the debts that go with the house too, if there are any. And guess what? When it comes to those of us who are the descendants of slaves, you're looking at the lien holders. The United States has the biggest liens on its house of any on the block. So as soon as you decide that you want to move into this house, well, you got to take care of those liens too. I, as a black man, cannot think that I can go to Germany and that I can opt out of whatever historical debts that Germany owes to the Jews or anyone else, and it owes dues to black people. And yet the Germans, they talk about reparations to black people. Gee, I wonder why. But as a black man, I cannot think that I can go to Germany or France and that I am not going to have my taxes go to pay Germany and France's historical debts to the Jews. I can't say, well, I wasn't part of that. I'm just here to work and do my... Why should I be paying anything? They'll tell you quick, well, these are the historical debts that this country owes because of things that it did, or in the case of France, things that it failed to do. And the same thing goes for the United States. You don't get out of the U.S.'s debts. The second that you come over here, you're volunteering to be part of those debts, the same way you called yourself volunteering yourself to get some of these goodies too. So any of you immigrants and any of you foreigners in the sound of my voice, just understand, you have now volunteered to be part of that group that has to pay for America's debts to black people, specifically those of us who are descended from slaves. You have now volunteered to be part of that group that has to pay up. Now, if you decide that you don't want to do that, then it's very simple. The same way that you look at a house and find out that it's got outstanding liens, you go, well, heck, I'm not going to pay somebody else's debts. You go find another house. You better stay away from this one because this house has all sorts of pre-existing obligations and debts that go along with it. And if you decide that you want this house, then you got to pay the debts. You don't get out of it. You don't get to hide behind, well, I didn't rack it up. You're right, you didn't rack it up. You volunteered to pay it. Simple as that. It's time that we start making these people act like adults and not children, acting like Billy. But Billy, it wasn't me. Nobody wants to hear that crap. Everything that the United States has done wrong, the greatest crime in human history, and here you are acting as accomplices after the fact. You're damn right you owe us. Nobody's playing games with you. I don't give a damn if you come from Japan or Jamaica. As soon as you set foot on American soil, you are now volunteering to pay those debts. At the end of the day, you knew when you came over here, as soon as you set your foot on this soil, you're sitting here going, well, I want a piece of all of this wealth and opulence that's going on here. Well, then you got to pay respect to the people who made it possible. If you don't like that, then you need to go to a place where they don't require that, because in this place, the sons and daughters of America's first victims, the only victims of this country, the slaves, we do require it. That's mandatory. You don't get out of that. Oh, well, that happened so long ago. No, it didn't. And the after effects, the problem is slavery was the biggest crime in human history. And not only was this crime unpunished, it's also unfinished. It's still going on now. With the sole exception of the putting people basically into stocks and pillories or otherwise, which they do behind closed doors now. That's what the prisons are for. Every single aspect and detail of slavery has been maintained in its totality all the way up to the present. From using the preacher man on the plantation in order to keep the slaves in check and tell them that you have to be obedient to massa. At least don't fight them. Don't be fighting them now. What would Jesus do? That's what they were doing on the plantations. Continues to this very day. And you got a whole bunch of bed wenches, which is part of the problem that we happen to have. Once you corrupt the mothers of a civilization, that civilization is effectively cut off at the knees and gutted. And if you create a situation where the man is not the leader and in too many cases doesn't even wish to be because he's confused, he was either raised the wrong way or his spirit, such as it was, has been broken. Look at Terry Crews if you want a pathetic example of that. If you wind up fostering cowardice and somebody who is going to be complacent, somebody who is going to just decide that he's going to defer to anyone and everyone, then what you have is not a man at all. The whole idea of breaking the slaves. I keep telling you that the breaking process is a daily process. It's not an event, it's a process. And every day, the breaking process must repeat itself over and over again. It is a daily breaking process that we've been subjected to. We and no one else. We get singled out for oppression. And it's not being done to us because of our tax bracket. It's not being done to us because of anything that we did. It's a matter of when you're black, this is what's supposed to be done, and it's an organized effort, largely organized by the government. Look what Kamala Harris did, if you want a clear example of that. The California Bureau of Prisons stuffs the prisoners into prisons to such a degree that it violates the Constitution. And what does Kamala Harris do? Does she look and say, hey, the Constitution is the law of the land? That's the end of it. No, what she says instead is, well, we know the prisons are overcrowded, but we're not letting anyone out, even if they're nonviolent offenders. We're not letting anyone go. Then when it comes time to talk about Proposition 8, the gay marriage ban that California's voters have passed, what does Kamala Harris say? Well, I have discretion and I'm not going to defend this law in court. But the voters voted for it. They wanted that. Well, I got discretion and that's the end of it. Well, what about the Bureau of Prisons overcrowding the prisons to the point that it violates the Constitution? Well, I have to defend that. I mean, I can't choose who my clients are. I disagree with what they do, but I'm bound. I have to defend it. See, she wants to pick and choose because that's how the system works. There are people who the laws are going to be applied to, black people when it comes to drugs, and there are people who the law will never be applied to, white people as it applies to meth. The meth epidemic is bigger than the crack epidemic or the heroin epidemics of the 70s and 80s ever were. And yet, for some damn reason, the entire social discourse about meth, and only meth, it's a politically protected drug, it's a politically protected narcotic. The entire discourse is about prevention. It's about drug treatment. It's a public health issue. And you see both Democrats and Republicans say that. Nobody's saying we need to build more prisons. Nobody's saying we need 3 strikes laws. Nobody's saying we need Rockefeller laws for meth. Nobody's saying we need mandatory sentencing guidelines and zero tolerance. Nobody's saying we need a war on meth. Instead, what they're saying is, well, the drug war is wrong. It's a failure. No, what it means is we got to stop that kind of talk as far as meth goes. We need people to understand when you say meth, you're talking about a drug that's protected. You're talking about a narcotic that has protection under law. These people are immune because it's dealing with white people. That's what it's really about. It ain't the drug that's being protected from law. It's not the drug that has immunity from prosecution. It's the people who use it. White people. That's what it really comes down to. All of these folks who have been eating off of our suffering, eating off of our labors, eating the fruits of our labors. You got these people who come in here, either from Europe, Asia, Africa, the Philippines, and here they are spitting on the individuals who made all of this possible. They see what the hell's being done against us, but instead of the response being, you know what, this is wrong, it's unjust, why? How many of these foreigners say, I came from a place where injustice was the rule of the land, and here they are over here in a place where the injustice is far worse, far more strident, far more blatant, and yet their response is, you Negroes, you guys, you just don't work. They know that it's a lie. They know that black people, nobody works harder than poor. And that being the case, nobody works harder than black people. But what these guys also understand is that there's a racialist pecking order. And that the only hope that those who are not already part of the in crowd have to get something resembling less odious treatment from the white majority is that they got to dump on black people. That's the rule. It's been the rule for the longest time. When the Irish showed up, they had the signs up saying no dogs or Irish allowed. This place does not serve Irish. They were not hiring Irish. What they were doing was they were hazing the Irish. Make them a little hungry. Give them a couple of smacks upside the head. Let them know that this is the kind of treatment you can expect. Unless you show that you're dedicated to Team White Supremacy. Come on, you know the rules. There's a racial pecking order here. You'll never be at the top of it. That's not for you. But unless you want to enjoy being at the bottom with the rest of the former slaves, you better show your allegiance to Team White Supremacy. And what happened during the draft riots? You had a lot of these Irish immigrants and people who have been Irish migrants who were being told you're going to be pressed into service in the war. Now, did the Irish decide that they were going to go after the ruling Protestant class in the U.S.? No, they didn't. What did they do? They went after black people in Boston, Baltimore, and Philadelphia. That's who the Irish went after. They showed the same kind of cowardice that they showed in Ireland. You want to know why Ireland still has the Anglo-Irish running things and the Anglo-Saxons in charge? You take a look at an industrial map of Ireland and you see who actually owns the companies. Very few of them are actually owned by Irish. Mostly they're owned by Anglo-Irish, which are the descendants of British and Irish collaborators with Britain's occupation. Or they're just owned by outright Anglos altogether. It ain't just Northern Ireland either. So the exact same cowardice that the Irish showed in Ireland, they showed that they hadn't discovered their guts over in the New World either. They were looking for a place on Team White Supremacy, and as soon as they had enough hazing and they showed that they could be counted on to uphold the old order, as soon as they had shown that they were going to uphold the racialist pecking order, then the designation of white was given to them. And the same thing happened with these other groups, like, say, the Italians, and this is one in particular that just makes me want to puke. The Italians, and we're talking about people who consider themselves to be educated, they love to wash your face with a little incident that happened in New Orleans. There were 11 Italians who got themselves lynched in the late 19th century. I think it was like 1890, 1891, because there was a police chief who got killed, and apparently some of the perpetrators, alleged perpetrators, they've been acquitted at trial, and what happened was apparently some of the good white folks decided they would get their hands on these Italians. At least 11 of them were hanged in public, and they were dismembered. In other words, they were treated like black people. They treated them the exact same way that black people have always been treated in this country. Now, that's pretty much the only such incident that occurred. But if you hear the Italian Americans tell the story why, they talk about it as if more Italians were killed by lynchings than black people were, the way they tell it. They love to wash your face with it every 5 seconds, trying to figure out some way to say, oh, see, we were treated as badly as black people, and yet look at our position. You see, you niggers, you niggas, you moolies, you don't do no work. That's what the Italians did. So you see how that whole pattern repeated itself over and over again. And the Hispanics, same thing. Going back to like the 1930s and 40s, you had the so-called braceros. These were Mexicans who were supposed to be doing work in the United States, day laborers and such. Apparently somebody missed their paychecks and sent them back home without pay, and I guess they've been nursing a grudge ever since. But you see the point that I'm trying to get across here. These other migrant groups, they have just basically very small, petty incidents, not even grievances, just small misunderstandings. And yet, as far as they're concerned, somehow that puts them in the same category as us. We got to make it clear. No, you're not in the same category as us. Stop being bashful about saying that. The reason they keep trying is because they don't see any resistance from us when they try it. Part of the same reason why it is that our music culture gets raped. We're not protecting it. We're not sticking up for it. So everybody looks and goes, well, hell, if you guys can't be bothered to protect what's yours, well, then I guess that makes it ours, because apparently you can't be bothered to protect it. No. We are an exceptional people. What happened to us was different than what happened to any other group of people in the entire history of the world, including the Jews. You do not get to claim that what happened. So 11 Italians had a misunderstanding with their European neighbors. That's not the same thing as what happened to us. Because you got one incident which was not even the result of a misunderstanding. The police chief actually got killed in New Orleans. A death actually happened. Emmett Till, nothing happened at all. The Jonesboro boys, nothing happened at all. The Central Park 5, nothing happened at all. Oh, but they all went to jail and got killed. That did happen. So no, you don't get to claim that garbage. Every single one of these migrants coming in here, you guys, as soon as you set foot on American soil, that's it. The meter starts running. Here's your receipt. Here's what you owe.
But I didn't do nothing. I had nothing to do with slavery.
You coming over here trying to benefit from it, ain't you? Until black people are made whole, until this country is forced to divest itself of the ill-gotten gain that it has reaped off of our black backs, until black people are restored to the condition that we should have been in from the very beginning, which is having the resources that we need to ensure our prosperity and posterity, then yeah, the meter keeps running. All these clowns, all this freaking confusion. You got these folks who have made common cause with white supremacy, and they're trying to tell us to sit on our hands while they eat the food that we cooked, that we prepared, was supposed to be in our bellies, and here they are just scarfing up what the world's supposed to be in our bellies. Don't dream. Yeah, we know it's going to ruffle some feathers. We know it's going to make people mad, because what they're really angry about is there's an exceptional group of people here in the United States, and it ain't the people who allegedly founded the country. The real founders of this country, the ones who really built it, they're asserting themselves. And because of the fact that people have not had to hear this, nobody's been saying this, nobody's been speaking boldly like this, now they're getting all caught up in their feelings. You guys shouldn't be saying that. Well, why not? It's the truth. What they're mad about is we're reminding them. We're reminding them that the people who have been locked out, shut out, and systematically kept out are the very ones who made the United States possible. Everything from its prosperity to its culture, that's what we put in place. All this other garbage, all this imitation European crap that you see going on, that's what the United States would be if it wasn't for black people. Culturally, the United States would be imitation Europe, and a poor imitation of that. Whatever you think of as being actual Americana, it's actually actual descendants of slave culture. That's what it is. It's what we made, what we built, what we made possible. That's a fact. All these other groups who have brought their so-called culture here, what in the world did they bring? It didn't catch on, not the way that ours did. It did not become part of the fabric of the nation. It simply became some interesting details, which is part of the reason why a lot of that stuff was eminently forgettable. This is the thing that our culture actually represents the culture of the country. Everybody else will be eternally foreign. Because the truth of the matter is, even the stuff that's supposed to be coming from Europe, classical music, that stuff still ain't thought of as American. The only classical music the United States has is jazz. That's America's classical music. It was the music that represented the heart and the rhythm of the city. Not a bunch of well-to-do genteel idiots out at their lake houses or in their lofts somewhere. You need a music that everyone can look at and say, yeah, this is the music of the nation. This is the heartbeat of the society. You don't get that from some hoity-toity clowns trying to place Shostakovich's greatest hits. It don't work like that. Small niches like that may make the 1% feel as if they're so much better than everyone else, but the very fact that you're trying to be better than everyone else means you're not like the rest of the society, which means that what you're doing is not part of the social fabric. And they're mad about that. They're mad about it because at the end of the day, they know that all their claims, all these other groups, their claims of hard work and all the rest of it, they know there's a lie, they know there's some fraud. But they need us to either be silent about the fraud or to agree with it. And what's happening is we're contesting the fraud. We're arguing with the fraud. We're disproving the fraud. As Dr. John Henry Clark said, when black people, those of us who are descended from slaves, when we start winning again, a whole lot of these folks who have previously been calling themselves, I ain't black, I ain't this, that, and the third, all of a sudden they're going to want to be black. You know, when our team starts winning again, all of a sudden, that's what they're going to be saying. There were people who just a few weeks from now, they would never have been tolerating talking about reparations stuff as a joke. But now that they're seeing that we can have an impact on presidential candidates, and they see the presidential candidates almost over night are talking about reparations, or at least they're saying the words. We got the bastards saying the words now. Now they're looking and going, oh my God, it's possible. Well, where's my check? Wait a minute. That's another thing that needs to be addressed. It's not merely a matter of whether or not you can trace your lineage to slavery, just to make sure we don't have anybody who's coming from outside the United States trying to make claims to something that ain't for them. It's also a matter of, I think that we ought to be checking people's online presence. You've been running around saying or posting or Googling the idea of reparations before now, or you were trying to just say, well, that ain't never going to happen. Or somebody who was not a true believer, or somebody who was basically saying, put this aside. In other words, you didn't believe that black people were owed, or you didn't believe it was necessary. In that case, then great. Your share goes to somebody else. That's what's supposed to be. People need to be made to pay a price for their actions. Actions should carry consequences. Yeah, you're going to have a whole lot of folks who previously been denying being black, denying being descended from slaves, or saying that that doesn't matter, or get over it. As soon as they find that it's time for the slaves to actually be compensated for their suffering, then all of a sudden, oh, that's going to be the only thing that matters. And how many of these folks out here, these immigrants, are going to be claiming that their great-great-grandfather was an octoroon, or their great-great-great-great-grandmother was on a plantation in Florida somewhere? All of a sudden, you're going to have a lot of these folks, especially these white folks, who are going to be claiming that, well, I have a black ancestor in my family tree, and it's going to be a con, just like the $5 Indian thing, just like Elizabeth Warren. It's going to be a con game. They're going to be looking, trying to figure out how the world do they get what's meant for us. They ain't been saying nothing up until now because it ain't true. As far as they're concerned, hey, they're white, they got their position, that's the end of it. But all of a sudden, they're going to be telling tall tales and inventing all sorts of fairy tales about black ancestors so you can get something out of it. And we got to make sure that we call foul on the play. No, this is not about trying to separate ourselves from the rest of the sons and daughters of Africa, but we need to get it straight where we stand. We need to get it straight what place we occupy in the diaspora so that people get us right. Because a lot of the behavior that we've been seeing inflicted against us, it's been foul and wrong. Let's be honest here and just call it what it is. You take a look at Africa, what you find are one of two things. You find hideous dysfunction, not entirely all their fault, but it's still there nonetheless. And you got a bunch of folks who, if you watch them on the news or if you watch them on videos, they try to act like us. They try to imitate a black American slave, post-slavery dialect. They try to speak in the patois of those of us that's descended from slaves. They try to do everything they can to copy us. We run around in sports jersey, and they want to do it too. So you got some guy in freaking Eritrea, or in Cameroon, or in Chad, or God knows where else, Namibia, South Africa. They're running around with a number 23 jersey. And you see them in front of the camera, and it's yo, 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 and all the rest is, you ain't never even been to New York. What the hell are you doing trying to imitate some black people from Brooklyn? What the hell do you sound like? You sound crazy. But this is what's going on, because at the end of the day, we are the ones who define what is seen as black in the eyes of the world. And quiet as it's kept, we've actually, especially under the horrifying conditions that we've been subjected to, we have represented the sons and daughters of Africa exceptionally well. As a group, and oftentimes, most times, in fact, as individuals, we have represented the global African diaspora very well and gotten very little gratitude in return. I can see it differently if those of us here in the United States who came out of slavery, if we were trashing the rest of the African diaspora, if we were trying to find ways to run the rest of the African family into the ground, I can see that differently. We haven't. In fact, we've been one of the few who have been flying the flag high and proud against unbelievable odds. We have been the ones who have been forging and attempting to establish an identity of Pan-Africanism that crosses all lines. We've been the ones looking at all of these foreign-born black people and their descendants, looking at them as one of us. Every time you look up, you see some African descendant who gets killed, whether it's Amadou Diallo or Akai Gurley, we've been the ones out there flying the flag for them. We did not care where they came from. As far as we were concerned, they were one of us. But the problem is, in too many instances, the sentiment has not been returned. And what's happening now is there has been a schism not created by us. Now, the schism is going to be healed in time. It's going to be. But first, what's going to have to happen is those of us who are descended from slaves, we're going to have to get enough power to make sure that A, we are protected from any further attacks, but B, we're also going to have enough power so that we can go ahead and knock some sense into the rest of the family. And we got to say it like that. We cannot afford to have any of these petty arguments where everybody decides they're going to go this or that way, or the old tribalisms and factionalisms coming to the surface. People are going to have to, the African is going to have to once again be made to reunite. This is an old problem. You go all the way back to Kemet with that. You want to know why Dr. John Henry Clark called the Nubian dynasties Kemet's last walk in the sun? It was because for the first time in 10,000 plus years, the two great houses of the Nile, Kush and Kemet, had finally been reunited under one roof. That wasn't the longest dynasty, but it was by far the greatest because it was a restoration of a righteousness that had been missing for the longest time. Reuniting the African family under one banner. It's an idea whose time has come, and it's one that we have struggled with more than any other. And that's how we open the door to let the Europeans and the Arabs and all the rest of the dregs of the world in. That's what happened. Because of the fact that we were too busy trying to fly the flag for whatever our particular street was, and didn't understand that the game was bigger than that. You go taking that message to Africa, you will not find a very receptive audience. Let's just call it like it is. The idea of African unity, there's going to have to be a working model for that instituted first, before you can have everybody else rally to it. And who better than us? But if we have anybody who decides that they're going to argue with that, they got something to say about that, they got a problem with that, they have declared themselves the enemies of black empowerment. And when you look at what it is that those of us descended from slaves have done for the entire global African family, everything that we've done, we accrue that to the collective esteem and honor and reputation of us all. On the other hand, these foreign-born black people, in too many cases, not all, but the vast majority, as far as they're concerned, they're repping the flag for Ethiopia. That Ilhan Omar woman, she ain't flying the flag for anybody else except for Somalians, and as you can see, she's flying the flag rather poorly. She doesn't have the kind of support base that she needs. I guess she figures that the rest of us are going to come flying to her aid because she's criticizing Israel. Well, you got to balance the taken with the given. I got to see how much she and the rest of the Somalians in Minnesota have been repping Team Black Empowerment. How much have they been doing in regards to those of us who laid the stones that they're walking on? What's their attitude been? Have they been on the team, or have they been a team of one? See, we got to make it where there are consequences to not being on code. We got to make it where there's a price to be paid for not doing things right. You don't get to get your butt in a cracking because white supremacy has its foot 12 inches up your behind all of a sudden. But family, nah, you only get to call on family when you've been acting like family. And that's what we're going to teach a lot of these other groups. We're hitting the reset button. Dr. John Henry Clark told you about that, and I've been quoting him heavily because the Grandmaster Teacher was ahead of his time on so many things, prescient times 10. He said that you cannot have an alliance unless you have the power to punish the partners should they break the alliance. That's the reason why those of us whose ancestors came out of the slavery experience, that's the reason why we got to get some power for ourselves. We cannot think, we cannot have a mature, intelligent conversation about building alliances with other members of the African diaspora until we first got some power that we can bring to the table. And part of that power is to make sure that people understand that when you enter into an agreement with us, you have any dealings with us, it's going to be honorable, it's going to be above board, ain't going to be no backstabbing, ain't going to be no backbiting, ain't going to be no dirtbag behavior. Because we have the power to punish you if you do it. And that's the reason why they're going to be left out in the cold. They have to be left out in the cold. We're going to let white supremacy have its way with them. And the reason why is this is called hitting the reset button. If we make it where even under these circumstances we decide that everything is everything and we're going to go back to what it was before, then it teaches them nothing. What it teaches them is, oh, well, all we got to do is to play these dumb descendants of slaves is, let's just say white supremacy's all over me. Help, help, my African brothers, I need help. Oh, they'll make that drum and they'll come running because they don't have any better sense. They're like Pavlovian dogs. They don't understand the nature of the game. No, show them no. Nobody's coming running this time. You're on your own. We will note what is being done to you. We will note how white supremacy is dismantling you. We will note it and say, see, white supremacy is on the march. But as far as flying to your aid, in fact, we're enforcing the rules of one another. How many police shootings have there been? Plenty of them. They haven't stopped. But then the question becomes, how many of them have we been speaking out on? Well, ain't been too many people feeling like they want to call it white supremacy or call it racist. So you notice how we're now remarking on it? No, we're not keeping a daily tally of the latest police shooting of an unarmed black person. Because there have to be rules. Either we're getting on code or we're not. And if you're not on code, you will not be treated as if you're on code. We don't make any exceptions. People need to be taught what the rules are. We have to make the rules clear and obvious. And this is part of that process. We are an exceptional people, and we're going to start acting like it. No matter who doesn't like it. For example, if we just use this as a case study, take the Nigerians just in particular. Love the Nigerian family. There are many of them who have their heads on straight. There are many of them who have been a big help to us in the black empowerment sphere. There have been many of them who have been very much helpful to us. They've done good work, and they're going to continue to do good work. But unfortunately, there's also a number who apparently seem to think that they're on a different team altogether. What is to be done about something like this? When we have this kind of dichotomy going on, how is this to be handled? We got some fundamental house cleaning that needs to be done. We also got to make sure that we get the rules engraved in stone and better yet etched in steel so that everybody understands. Because the last thing that we need is for what we're building here to be torn apart by its own internal contradictions. We need for everybody to understand that there is going to be a new order under the sun, and the new order is going to merely be a restoration of the old. And we're not playing games about it. But no one's going to be able to take us seriously either within or without unless we've got power. Those of us who are on this code, it's etched into our DNA. It happens to be in our bones, it's in our blood, it's in our molecules. Because we've been enduring this for so long. And there are a lot of people, some of them who look just like us, who are scared of seeing us rise. Because the problem that a lot of them have is they didn't want to be black. They've got to the point now where they don't want to be black at all. They're trying to escape blackness. And they'll try to hide their cowardice and their self-hate behind all sorts of kumbaya. Oh, we're colorblind, etc. Well, if you're so colorblind, why does it bother you when you see black people trying to fight for our rights? Why does it bother you, the idea that you might have black people in charge? Why does that not sit well with you? A large part of the reason why it doesn't sit well with them is they've been completely bamboozled into the idea that black rule means black misrule. I can show you plenty of incidents where black people have been in charge and run things right. The problem happens to be, at the end of the day, we are a people under siege. A few islands of black competence in a sea of white hostility and malignance. It's going to be a Herculean effort. Beyond Herculean, it's going to be a colossal effort for us to be able to make sure that we have our integrity intact so that we are in charge, remain in charge, and are able to sustain ourselves. These are the realities. But there's a lot of black people who don't like that idea. The concept of black people being in charge, well, never mind the fact that you've got white supremacy ripping you off by William Sunday. Never mind the fact that your roads are crumbling, the bridges are falling apart while you're driving over them, the power grid is failing, the wars are breaking the nation's back, and the economy is disintegrating in front of you. I mean, black misrule is just so much inferior to the good white rule that we've had because it's yielded so many benefits. For the 1%, you don't even share in any of that, but you're terrified that the 1% of white folks who are in charge are somehow not going to be happy. That's a slave. And these are people who are not going to be of any use to us whatsoever. There's a lot of folks, in fact, 50% in fact, who are going to be left behind and of a necessity need to be. Not everyone's going to make it to the promised land. In fact, there's a lot of them who we don't want to make it to the promised land. The entire point of the 40-year wilderness running around in circles was to let that old generation die off. these clowns would have brought the same old backward mentality with them to the promised land, and before it's all over, they would have been marching right back to Egypt. Can we get our old jobs back in the slave quarters? Nah, forget that. We need a clean break with the past. We need to be unapologetic about it. We need to be strident about it. We need to teach people how it is that we are to be regarded, and we need to make sure that we stand up for that. That's going to mean that a lot of these folks who've been playing this okey-doke on us and trying to pretend, playing the game of we're all minorities. Nah, you're a minority. I'm the descendant of slaves. Well, we're all people of color. My color is black. I ain't no person of color. I'm black. You be a person of color. You go ahead and be lumped together as a polyglot. I'm black. Well, we're all disadvantaged. No. We're disadvantaged. You're just occasionally inconvenienced. Don't compare yourself to me. We are an exceptional people. Those of us descended from slaves, we're exceptional. We're different. This is not about saying that we're better than anyone else, but I'll be damned if we continue to lie that somehow we are lesser than. Because that's what the white media tries to do, and they're flunkies. And not all their flunkies are white. But white supremacy is always trying to teach that black people are inferior. That's part of the reason why they like to put out so many stats saying black people are at the bottom of this, black people are at the bottom of that. It's to reinforce a narrative. Black people are at the bottom because they're supposed to be. Their condition cannot be changed. Once we start putting out there and aggressively making it known, our condition is artificial. And it has been made to be this way, and we are targeted to make sure we're deprived of resources, that we are continually being attacked, kept under siege, harassed, never given a moment's respite. Whenever we try to build something, the forces of white supremacy and their non-white flunkies are immediately sent in to disrupt what we're doing and try to take it over or to otherwise try to spoil it. Once that becomes firmly established, once we make it clear that we're going to do what it takes to stop this because we see it clearly, don't expect all of these minorities and all of these people of color, don't expect them to be saying, hey, it's a good thing that these black people are on the rise. They're going to be the main ones saying they don't like it. They're going to be the main ones saying that they can't tolerate this, that there's something wrong with it. These talking heads that you see, the children of immigrants, like Joy Reid and Angela Rye, when they see us getting to our feet, when they see us taking power in our hands, when they see us having the ability to call hands, look what they've done just the last couple of weeks alone. You guys need to stop saying all of this stuff about slavery. Yeah, because what they're really saying is we've been the Negroes who white supremacy's put over you. And our ability to keep our position is directly tied to whether or not we can lead you slaves around by the nose. And you guys are making it clear that you won't follow us and white supremacy won't need us, and we can't have you doing that. You're going to mess it up for us. That's what they're saying. White supremacy's hand-picked bootlicks, white supremacy's overseers that they've installed in our community. These guys are scared that we are going to bust their hustle. We're going to put a jinx on their hustle. Well, they're wrong. We ain't going to put a jinx on the hustle. We're going to destroy their hustle. We're going to annihilate their hustle. We are going to utterly obliterate it. We will leave nothing of it, not even the memory of it. And since their entire existence is completely tied to that, well, there won't be anything to sustain them either. We intend to make sure that white supremacy is repaid in kind for every single bit of maltreatment that we have received. Every insult, every attack, all of it will be paid back in full. You know what you call that? You call that justice. The world has been fighting a centuries-long war to make sure that this doesn't occur. And these other groups coming in, here they are trying to eat off of us, and they do not recognize what has been done to us, and they spend most of their time trying to make excuses for it. We cannot have people who are not on our side, and here we are trying to make common cause with them or trying to be friends with them. That won't work. No, it's time for us, way past time for us, to be politically selfish. That's going to be the battle cry for 2019. We are politically selfish. We must be politically selfish. That's what Dr. John Henry Clark meant by exercising the essential selfishness of survival. We have been selfless to our own detriment. We're now on death's door. We are now on life support because we've been trying to be everybody's buddy. Nah, forget it. Oh, these other groups, they're going to be criticizing you. These other groups, they won't like you. Well, you're just going to have to hate us. When we got power, we ain't going to be having time to hear your hate. And we won't care what you have to say because you won't have the ability to do anything to us. So your words will be irrelevant. Oh, that's not going to be very popular. Damn popularity, man. Power ain't about popular. In fact, power is usually the most unpopular thing in the room. It ain't got to be popular. It just has to get your way. That's what power's about. And these immigrant groups who've been coming in here, as they see that white supremacy is going to put aside the game of propping up these groups, as the ability to flood us with all of these non-black foreigners stops being an effective strategy, it loses its potency because we are successfully able to assert ourselves, we organize our numbers, focus our will, start choosing targets for political undermining and attack, and then we start getting our way. All of a sudden, white supremacy are going to be like, okay, well, to hell with this little strategy of trying to propping up these non-black foreigners. We aren't bringing in a whole bunch of them. They're not doing their job anyway. All of a sudden, you're going to be seeing these guys getting cut off. And here they are going to come running back to us as they did 120 years ago, trying to be our buddies, and that ain't going to work. That ain't going to work. These immigrants owe us just as much as these Europeans do. They owe us, and they owe us big. So do not ever let them run that con on you that they weren't part of it, so they don't owe anything. Zbigniew Brzezinski himself, an immigrant, said that if you want to correct the past, that's going to mean imposing some consequences for the people who may not have carried out the historical sins, but they benefited from it. That's the standard. You benefited from it. See, if you're European, you can go ahead and say that. You can say that for the Japanese, you can say it for the Native Americans, that's fine. Because it doesn't matter who's in the middle of the white supremacist racialist pyramid. What matters is who's at the bottom. As long as you maintain that, everything else becomes relative. But making sure that black people are at the bottom and made to be at the bottom, and violence of all sorts, political violence, economic violence, social violence, and of course physical violence used in order to freeze that sick, degenerate order in place, hey, that's all justified. So yes, this is a good time to start collecting the quotes from all the white people who over the last few centuries have been talking about even if the crime happened long before you were born, even if the crime was done by someone other than yourself, you got to pay the price for it because you benefited from it. Okay, it happened a long time ago. Doesn't change the fact that the descendants of those people who are wronged are still here. That's the ones that Jews have been using. Most of the people who were actually caught up in the Holocaust are dead now. And they've been getting caked off for 70 years. They've been getting kicked off. And now their descendants are saying, well, the countries that did it are still around, so you've been paying us all this time. Why should you stop now? Okay, so when black people come along and say, well, you know what? We got a crime far worse than what happened to the Jews. And the country who did it, or countries who did it, they're still around and they're still living fat off of what they did to us, the greatest crime in human history. We're coming for our check. And we know you're going to kick up a fuss about it. We know you ain't going to like it. And that's going to make it so much sweeter. We're banging on the door. And soon we're going to have enough strength and enough organization where we can start kicking the door. Our demand is going to be etched in steel. And the same way that you found white supremacy's flunkies like the breakfast schlubs and Charlemagne the Chump, this guy kills me. I'm all about what's black, whether anybody knows me for the longest time. This idiot's got a freaking book behind his head that says black privilege on it. That's meant to appeal to a white audience. That kind of stupid talk. And here he is talking all black empowerment. Yeah, everybody's black empowerment now. And the reason why is you see who speaks for the streets. I'm not interested in getting on anybody's show because at the end of the day, this ain't about trying to reach white supremacy's hand-picked flunkies and mouthpieces. This is about reaching you. That's who I'm trying to reach. You're the audience who matters because you're the ones who are going to get things done. You want to know why Kamala Harris is looking right now and wondering, oh my God, how do I get out of this fix I put myself into? It's because you guys responded the right way. You guys are what's going to determine victory or defeat. This will not be a fight overnight. It ain't going to be won overnight. White supremacy didn't take the world over overnight. We are not going to reclaim the world overnight. This is not going to be one and done. Please don't think that it all comes down to 2020. This is going to be a generational war. In fact, this is going to be the new normal. And if you ain't got what it takes to be able to put your foot to the metal and to be able to keep yourself engaged, keep the morale high, keep the energy high, and to be staying with this agenda for the next 25 years, if you can't keep this up for the next 25 years, there's no way, you're kidding yourself if you want to talk about keeping this up forever. If this is something that wears you down and it's just too much and it ain't happening fast enough and all the rest of that, if that's the mentality you got, then you ain't built for this. This is only for the doers. This is for the people who live this, eat this, breathe this, are this. And it's not even coming from a place of anger and that much. We have a righteous indignation. We have a righteous rage that must be satisfied. But the main thing that this comes from is the irresistible need that justice be done. Justice is the righting of a wrong. And yes, we have a right that justice be retributed. There must be an element of retribution to it. Not merely for the white supremacists who carried out the greatest crime in human history, but for those who have come here trying to figure out how to pick over the bones of our ancestors. Trying to figure out what's in it for them. Everyone who perpetrated the crime and are now currently seeking to benefit from it after the fact. Stop being bashful about calling it out. It's time to hit the reset button. It's time to let everybody know that there's going to be a fundamental rethinking of what it is that you had in mind when it comes to us. All the old assumptions no longer apply. And when these migrants show up, what they're going to be finding is there's going to be less and less black people going to their stores until eventually there's none at all. And when they try to call themselves these immigrants who think of themselves as being so high-minded, doing their best white liberal impersonation is all they're doing. When they show up, they're going to be finding the conversation different because black folks ain't going to be looking to have friends. Oh, you don't mind being seen in the same room with me? Oh, I just love you. That stuff's getting left behind. It's going to be a new political maturity that's finally coming to the surface and asserting itself. We are going to start speaking in the terms that we should have been speaking in all along. And that's in the terms of our power. Notice the wording, our power. Not merely power, but our power. And when they have a problem with it, when they decide that they just, oh, you guys, y'all aren't the way that you used to be. Y'all didn't change.
Ain't much I can do
No.
about it.
What's happened is we've thrown off the programming. We've had enough of trying to be everyone's friend. Because when you're politically mature, you understand that we are a group and groups don't have friends. Groups have interests.
See if you can retrieve my lawful property from some goddamn thief.
Ain't nobody knows who took your stuff, mister.
I seem like some kind of liar. Is that
I
why
see
you
this
won't
open.
No, but
listen?
YouTube is run by white supremacists. That's hardly news. But last Thursday, I delivered a video essay. My Thursday evening address that was so shocking, so mind-blowing, so beyond belief that the white supremacists who run YouTube immediately leapt upon it within a couple of hours of the video having been posted. Because I keep telling you, these guys are monitoring this channel. It's not a matter of someone telling you they're watching this place. Because the truth spoken here scares them. And what was the subject of the video, might you ask? I was talking about sculptures of George Washington. We were simply talking about art. But the mere discussion of art was too much for the white supremacists who run YouTube. Well, we're going to go ahead and give them another dose of truth. The idea of American exceptionalism is rooted in propaganda. White media controls the minds of the masses, as I keep telling you, through the use of lying narratives and fraudulent images. And this is not new. All the way back to the founding of the country. And you can use George Washington as an exceptional example of this idea. He is an exceptional case study of how white supremacy uses images in order to forward lies. For example, take a look at this sculpture of George Washington. It was commissioned in 1818 by the North Carolina legislature. But more importantly than that, George Washington's fellow slave-holding thug buddy Thomas Jefferson was the person most responsible not only for selecting the sculptor who created this obscenity, it was also Jefferson's idea to have Washington presented in the attire of a Roman military officer. And if you're wondering what this idiot is supposed to be doing, he's supposed to be writing his farewell address. As the New York Times explained, there was a very serious reason for presenting George Washington as a Roman. Quote, the artist attempted to elevate Washington out of his historical circumstances and into a pantheon of classical heroes, and to inspire moral elevation more than individual remembrance. Well, that's 3 or 4 lies for the price of one. This was the New York Times, of course, trying to figure out how to say that you ought to love this statue and to love George Washington by extension. There are tons of sculptures of great Americans, tons of sculptures of great people. The New York Times could keep auditory praise on, but they decided, nah, for George Washington, we're going all out. We're going to tell you this great man. So you see the same sick mentality that made it so popular to try to mythologize and lionize and deify a slave-holding thug is still alive and well. That mentality is still extant. The racists who produced and promoted this persona of Washington as a Roman, they did this deliberately. They wanted to create the national idea that George Washington was the last Roman. That does make a sick kind of sense when you think about it. The Roman Empire established itself with genocide and wars, as did Washington's America. The New York Times, in a bit of perverted white-splaining, went on to dismiss Washington's slaveholding as being separate from whether or not he deserves praise or whether or not he ought to be shown in any sort of laudatory light. As the New York Times wrote, what anyway are American values? Washington, Jefferson, and the bulk of their fellow revolutionaries were slaveholders after all. But what the classicized statue implies is that certain ideals, notably liberty and justice for all, endure beyond any individual presidential biography, and those ideals are not invalidated when our leaders
Damn, don't kill him, motherfucker.
Before I go any farther, let me point out that there is nowhere where you can actually say that this statue is implying certain ideals. This is not merely reading between the lines. This is inventing lines out of whole cloth. And secondly, if you hold somebody up, you hold up the image of a man, even posthumously, if you hold up his image as being the embodiment of certain values, then at the very least, shouldn't he live up to some of them? This is the New York Times doing this crap. Saying, never mind the fact that George Washington didn't live up to a damn one of these values, he ought to be held up. We ought to revere him anyway, in spite of the fact that he didn't live up to any of these so-called American values that are being ascribed to him. This is how these guys can, without batting an eyelash, tell you as a black person you ought to stand up for the Star-Spangled Banner, even though it's a slave owner's carol. It's a song that talks about how no slave can ever hope to be free. There's something about black folks. The Star-Spangled Banner was written by a slave owner. Francis Scott Key owned slaves. He went to court and defended the rights of slave owners. So you got the New York Times showing you that they are in full agreement with this sick mentality. And as for saying that George Washington flouted these American values, let me tell you something. Enslaving people, enslaving children, slaughtering people just to have the ability to own other human beings or to kill other human beings at will. This is not merely flouting liberty and justice and all the rest of that. This is someone who is the enemy of liberty and justice. If you're going to talk about great statues of people who ought to be held up as the embodiment of certain values, then it ought to be someone better than this. This piece that I'm quoting from, this piece of crap, is what I should say. It was posted by the New York Times on June 27th of this year. We ain't talking about something from 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 years ago. We're talking about something from just a couple of weeks ago. This is the New York Times doing this garbage, folks. How refreshing to have white people dictate to us what is important to remember about a slave owner. This is not merely minimizing what this monster did. This is to demand that we stand up and cheer him, praise him for being a slave owner. The New York Times, all the lies that are fit to print. But this mentality has been going on a long time. No wonder these clowns think they can get away with it. You see all of these images and busts of George Washington created from the late 18th century all the way up until the 20th. You see one statue after the other showing George Washington dressed up as a Roman, trying to connect him to classical, whatever that means, European history. Trying to show that, well, George Washington, he's come from the same cloth as all of these other great Europeans who went on these rampages of bloody murder across the continent. Hold George Washington up in the same way that you would speak about Napoleon, one of his contemporaries, or the same way that you would speak about King James, or the same way that you would speak about King Arthur and other fables and frauds. These were the buttons that they were trying to push in the popular consciousness. Greece had Alexander the Great. Rome had Julius Caesar, and the United States has George Washington. That's what they were meaning to say. This was going to be the creation of America's national myth, national mythology. And what is a mythology without a pantheon of gods? That's what this is meant to do. Don't believe me about the gods part? In 1840, the United States Congress commissioned this statue of George Washington. This time he's presented not merely as a Roman, but as a god. The very gesture that he's shown in is in fact taken from the classical depictions of Zeus. So the intent of this one was the federal government of the United States making sure to literally etch in stone that George Washington wasn't a man, he is our god. He is the embodiment of American values, but American values are white power. And this is from the United States federal government. We're not talking about a couple of ham-headed racists out in North Carolina or Virginia. This is the federal government doing this before the American Civil War. So what did that tell you? You had all sorts of Yankees and good old boys. They couldn't agree on much, but they could agree that there was a value, that there was worth to putting George Washington on the pedestal of being a deity, to deify this guy. You had Yankees and Southerners who agreed on that. They couldn't agree on much, but they agreed on that. The necessity of holding up this white man who was a slave owner as being the embodiment of all that is American and virtuous. And by the way, it didn't stop there. Congress deciding to try to preserve and promote this idea of George Washington as a god on the taxpayer's dime, might I add. You've heard the painting of the Sistine Chapel, right? Well, the racists who run the United States did the exact same thing with George Washington. In 1865, the U.S. Congress commissioned a Greek-Italian artist, Constantino Bramudi, to paint the ceiling of the Capitol building, just like the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And part of his fresco was called the Apotheosis of Washington. Now, this image is supposed to be evocative of the Sistine Chapel. I wonder if the Catholic Church can sue. They probably got a case. And it was delivered, of course, just more of this deifying George Washington. Look how ridiculous this is. Never mind the fact that, like all the other founders of the U.S., George Washington wasn't even a Christian. He was a deist. So it is doubly ridiculous to show George Washington all gussied up and with all of these other Greek and Roman-looking people around him, dressing him up as if somehow he has something to do with Catholicism or the Bible or what have you. But they understand this imagery. They understand exactly what this imagery is supposed to stand for. And this crap was slapped up there in 1865 at a time when the nation was just recovering from a civil war over slavery. The government wanted to make it clear that the U.S. was a white man's land. Blacks were a far larger percentage of the country in 1865 than today, but white rulers of the U.S. made it a point to exclude any imagery of black people from this painting on the ceiling of what's supposed to be the People's House. But of course, by people's house, they mean white people's house, not black people's. The racists who founded this sick country, who people like me YouTube, clabbered, happened to adore, they chose someone who they could deify because that was part of the plan. It was all part of the plan that if you are going to show that white supremacy is holy and hallowed and it's a value worth laying down your life for, you got to show that the good offices of God himself are lent to the satanic enterprise of white supremacy. That's what this is all about. Nobody questioned the righteousness of the people featured on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, fraud though that is. And if you go ahead and show the leaders of the United States, the founders of the United States in the exact same format, well, people are going to be less likely to question that too. So here come the lies. Etched in stone, painted on frescoes, engraved in steel, and the country is told that you're supposed to bow down to these images. See, this is not about an American ideal. This is about an American idol. That's what this is. This is idolatry. This is telling people to bow to the image of a pagan deity. St. George of Washington. And by the way, in case you were wondering, according to Merriam-Webster, apotheosis means the perfect form of something, but its secondary definition is elevation to divine status. Yeah, I think that's what they were thinking of when they commissioned this particular fresco. What they were doing was they wanted to elevate George Washington to divine status. This is a guy who didn't even have his own teeth.
Ooh.
And yet he's divine. You see how deliberate this is? How brazen they are about it, creating this fraud? Finally, we come to the part that YouTube hated so much. The part of the last video that they had to bring it down. They had to remove it. They felt so threatened by the truth. Well, here it is again. Of all the visual motifs used for George Washington in the early decades of the country's history, the one image that is by far the most prolific is that of George Washington shown standing beside a fascist. And that's not a Roman column, it's a fascist. You see that image of Washington in sculptures of him all over the country, in fact, all over the world. Most of the statues of George Washington that you see are of him standing beside the fascists. Even in England, a statue of Washington in Trafalgar Square shows him beside a fascist. Now, of all the things to show him standing beside, why would they make it a point to have it be the fascist? Why that symbol in particular? The fascist was a Roman artifact, a bundle of wooden rods, most of the time shown with an axe handle protruding from it. The fascists symbolize Roman authority through violence. And I, of course, understand that there's always going to be some person who feels the need to come bombing into the comment section trying to tell us what little they think they know. Last time I had somebody who tried to tell me that the Roman fasces was apparently a symbol of unity. That's what it was supposed to represent. Let me tell you something stupid. I have been telling people till I'm blue in the face, and that would be an accomplishment for me. There is the standard definition of something, and then there is the practical definition of it. Obviously, some people need to clean the crap out of their ears and listen. The standard definition is what we are told something is, and then the practical definition is how it manifests itself in practice. During Jim Crow, you had the so-called literacy tests before you could vote. That's what they were called, their literacy tests. But actually what they were was, let us come up with a procedure that we can claim on paper disqualifies people, but all the people who are going to be disqualified are black. The only ones who are going to be disqualified are black. There's the standard definition of a literacy test, and then there was a practical definition of it, what it was actually for, how it manifested itself. There's the standard definition of what a fascist is, and then there is the practical definition of it. Nobody who was running around with a fascist did it as a symbol of unity. It was always done as a symbol of authority and control. There is nowhere where the fascist has ever stood that could regimes. From Rome to the United States. From Rome to Mussolini's Italy. It has always been a symbol of oppression. It has never been a symbol of gung-ho. It's never been a symbol of let's all stand together. It was just a symbol of the ruthless enemies of freedom and decency should rally together so that they can enact violence against the civilized people of the world. That is what the fascist stands for. That's what it is. No one can lie and say that that thing is a symbol of freedom. And as soon as I saw the fascists, I immediately focused on it. You want to know why? Because the fascists is where we get the word fascism from. But the racist rulers of the U.S. were practicing fascism long before Benito Mussolini did, long before fascism was even a term. Fascism is dead in Italy today, but as we see with President Tangerine, fascism is alive and well in the United States. And why not? The U.S. was the birthplace of fascism, just like it was the birthplace of Nazis. And how fitting that George Washington was the first fascist. He was the father of fascism. When you see a man whose most numerous image is him standing beside a symbol from which we get the word fascism, it doesn't get more blatant than that, folks. And by the way, it's not just George Washington who we see the symbol of the fascists. In the House of Representatives, you find not one but two fascists. Every time a president delivers a State of the Union address, it is actually a state of fascism address. And this in what's supposed to be the people's house just goes to show you that fascism is not merely something practiced by America's founders. Fascism runs at the very core of the United States government. Fascism is the foundation of this wicked, sick nation. The people who rule this demented white supremacist playground, this white supremacist toilet, they're showing you that you don't live in a democracy. You never have. You live in and have always lived under fascism. The United States is not a republic. Never has been. The United States is a theocracy, and the official state religion is white supremacy. And when you see George Washington depicted in messianic imagery, that lets you know that he is the embodiment of America's white supremacist God. That's what's going on here. That's what YouTube feared so much and didn't want you to hear. This is what they don't want you to see. The iconography of white supremacy, of fascism, of evil is all around you. And when you understand that it's this blatant, that's when you realize it's been right in front of you the whole freaking time. They weren't hiding it. They were never hiding it. They just don't talk about it. They do something better than talk. They act it out. Actions have always spoken louder than words. Just like when YouTube took the video down before, they didn't have to say that I terrified them. Their actions spoke far louder than their words ever would. Whenever people talk about removing symbols of racism, you'll remember that President Tangerine appealed to white anxiety, and he demanded to know, well, we're going to be taking down the images of racist American presidents. When does it stop? When does it stop? This is the reason why he said that. This is the reason why he was in such a panic. The founders of the U.S. were slave owners and genocidal lunatics and fascists. And the men who walk in their footsteps, they stand in the Capitol building, they stand inside the Washington Monument. Did you know that there is an image of George Washington standing beside a fascist inside the base of the Washington Monument? It's all around you. They did that deliberately. They know about it, you don't. You see it right in front of you, you don't acknowledge it, but they do. This is why you don't see me telling you that you're going to get results from voting for politicians at the national level. It's about more than that. These guys stand under not one but two symbols of fascism every time they go to work. I know that some of you out there still cling to the rotted corpse of black congressmen and the occasional black senator, and you think that these people somehow represent you. They do not. They made a deal with the devil when they took office. You You keep demanding that they stand up for democratic principles, and they don't even work in a democratic institution. They understand what's really going on here. You're the one who's confused. You're the one who doesn't get it. So I want you to understand, this is basically a Clip Notes version of the video that I gave before, because I want to hit on the most important points. That the imagery of George Washington and the sick white supremacy that undergirds it, the idea of we're going to choose a man who we know to be nothing more than flesh and blood, and racist, corrupt flesh and blood at that, we're going to deliberately deify him, or as the word apotheosis means, we are going to elevate him to divine status. That is not just happenstance. It was deliberate. Did you think that Thomas Jefferson just pulled that one out of his racist behind? He knew exactly what he was doing. And the men who continued to do that, to press that particular type of image of George Washington long after his death, after all the founders of the United States were dead, and even then, when they were dead, they decided, oh, to hell with George Washington as a mere Roman. We're going to show him as a god. When the Congress commissioned that statue of George Washington as Zeus, and that's what it was meant to be, was George Washington as the god, as the king of the gods, they did that after Washington was dead. So they became even more outrageous in their hero worship of him. Not less, more outrageous. It just goes to show that when you create a myth, like all myths, it gets bigger and better over time. Every time you tell it, the story gets better. Because that's the idea. They knew that it was going to be exploded beyond all possible reality, and that was the point. Make George Washington bigger than life? Yeah, that's the ticket. Because when they say George Washington, at the end of the day, you get confused. Because on the one hand, you know that he was a slave owner, though the New York Times decides that that's not that important. That's just a trivial, minor detail that only petty people would focus on. Even though that's where George Washington made his money from. George Washington paid the Continental Army, at least for a while, he had to pay them out of his own pocket. Where did George Washington get the money to be able to pay an army from? He got it from slavery. He got it from his plantation. But the New York Times doesn't bring that up. The fact that the country owes its very existence to the fact that George Washington was making his money off of slavery, well, we don't mention that. Bury the truth. And this is supposed to be what passes for me. And you don't hear this coming from any of the congressional black talkers.
What's going on, viewer? Thank you for stopping by.
The fraud of George Washington the Roman, George Washington the Divine. They're not going to. Because they are making their money off this white supremacist institution, the administrative arm of white supremacy. And they're not going to say that the administrative arm of white supremacy has something wrong with it. They know the game and they love to play along. I still gotta laugh at the New York Times and their pathetic little white-splaining saying that the artist attempted to elevate Washington out of his historical circumstances and into a pantheon of classical heroes. No, showing Washington as a Roman military officer, that is not elevating him out of his circumstances. And they say that as if there were high-minded racists in the 18th century deciding, well, or rather 19th century saying, well, you know, we've got to make George Washington better than what he was because he was such a poor, downtrodden fellow. Hell no, this was not about elevating him out of his circumstances. This was about not merely putting him into a pantheon of classical heroes, as we see with the Congress in 1840. This was about elevating George Washington to the pantheon of gods. That's what it was really about. But you don't hear this on TV, none. You don't hear it on buffoon entertainment television. You don't hear it from any of the fakers, frauds, and phonies who call themselves black media, the old dead black media. This is the reason why we gotta make sure that we put the old black media in its coffin and nail that damn thing shut. And by the way, speaking of ineffective...
Merry Christmas Eve, player. Second viewer. Appreciate your viewer.
That's no surprise, but the problem is white supremacy is slowly drawing the curtain on its tools and breaking them one by one. We've seen a certain entire ethnic groups who thought that they were going to be white supremacy's good buddies are now having to come in for some abuse. Oh, and on the black side of the ledger, the black folks who thought they were going to keep eating off of white supremacy, well, they're finding that the menu is getting smaller and smaller. And the service and cafe white supremacy is becoming a lot more surly these days. The portions are getting a lot more skimpy.
Literally, when you make your character for Red Dead Redemption Online, he's the one that breaks you out of prison.
That's why they became tools of white supremacy in the first place. So they don't want to accept what's clearly right in front of them. White supremacy is beginning to cut the strings for their puppets. And these morons don't have a plan B. They figure they get them out of the hair, you can get this or that white apparatus, whether in government or media, was going to be a career, and they're figuring out that white supremacy has long-term plans for any of its tools. You can get out there and sing the Star Spangled Banner as long as you want to. David Clark thought they had something to show in. Get out there and cheer on the police murdering black people. That's what these good white supremacists want to hear. Yeah, except they looked and said, thanks for saying that, stupid. We got a couple of chuckles out of watching a black person cheerleading the death of other black people.
They found
But, you know, we're tired of looking at you, David Clark. That's me, or maybe not. That boy's always been kind of slow, so I doubt he's actually figured it out. He's probably sitting there right now going, I don't understand why it is that I didn't get put in the cabinet. Not even a government job, not even a government grant. I wonder what I did wrong. Maybe I didn't bash black people enough. That boy talks like freaking Lurch, don't he? Black so-called police and teachers and other government employees are finding out that there would be career advancement stops in their tracks. And as for black politicians, well, the less sick, the better. Except these clowns have spent not a few years with people calling them congressman or senator or some other sort of highfalutin title, and it went completely to their empty little heads. And these black politicians need to be singled out for special scorn because they depend upon the rank and file black citizens to vote for them. These guys are traitors to black empowerment. They're white infiltrators sent to spy on us, to mislead us, to take any revolutionary fervor that we have and to dispel it or to focus it away from white supremacy. That's what they were sent to the black community to do.
Let's like these motherfuckers up.
As far as they're concerned, they're going to make a career out of being a politician. That's the reason why these guys are so completely and thoroughly unsuited to do anything else. They didn't plan to do anything else. Their plan was going to be white supremacy's secret weapon, white supremacy stealth envelopes. And that was the plan. And all this time, most of you thought that chumps like John Lewis, Harris, and the Congressional Black Chambers were your representatives. You didn't even notice that these guys, these windbags, give their empty hot air speeches standing under the very symbols of fascism, and that none of them educated you about that. It's not even that you know. It's because when you feel like you're on the team, well, now you gotta stand up for the team. Yeah, but your team isn't Team Black Empowerment. It's Team White Supremacy. Well, you dance with who brought you, right? These sorry Negroes you see on white media, they're merely another form of control. I've been telling you that for years. They are another mechanism that white supremacy uses to keep us in check. And the sad truth is that they've been largely successful.
Damn, that motherfucker flew.
Not like you should. Every once in a while, you always need some brain-dead moron who'll come bombing into the comment section going, but Maxine Waters did this, Maxine Waters said that, and Maxine Waters was this, and Kamala Harris was that, and give them time, and shut up. Barack Obama and that show, he everything with the ultimate examples of the strategy. They don't do anything about white supremacy apologists. That's what Barack Obama was and has always been. Barack Obama sat there and not only did he not defend the black community, heck, Barack Obama and his wife didn't even defend themselves. And they understood that that was exactly what white supremacy wanted to see. That's what the white majority wanted to see, so they tried to cover up this cowardice with blatantly insincere rhetoric about when they go low, we go high. See, they love pious pious Negroes like that, because pious Negroes say we'll always turn the other cheek. Which white supremacy clearly understands as we are never going to threaten you, we will never fight back, we will never so much as speak against you, we'll just take your abuse.
Correct?
When they go low, we go high.
Bullshit.
Or like when white people attack us, we hide for cover. That's what she's really saying. Because Barack Obama had no problem calling Kanye West a jackass on TV.
38 cents.
But when a white Republican called him a liar at his own State of the Union address on live international television, Barack Obama didn't have anything to say about him. See, Joe Wilson goes, "You lie!" And Barack Obama didn't call him a jackass. Kanye West gave his lopsided, so psychobabble about white supremacy. Barack Obama, no, he's a jackass. Why? Because Kanye West showed up Taylor Swift at a freaking award concert, at an award ceremony. Really? Meanwhile, you got a racist methead who is screaming all sorts of accusations at the president live on television. Well, the president doesn't have anything to say about that. The police are killing people, and Barack Obama decides that, well, what we need is to pass laws making where you better not question the police. In fact, we need to protect the police more, even though it's ridiculous. The police have every type of outrageous protection of the law you can imagine.
And how many of these people got COVID-19? Fucking 9. 9 of them dumbasses.
Blue lives matters supposed to do is supposed to show, hey,
how do you copy? They said something that I really don't want to repeat. I showed them on the
okay, fine. But the sad part is, Barack
just the fact that you had to hear it was like,
refusal to take on white supremacy or whatever delusions he may have about it.
Permanently.
Have you ever seen these white politicians calling white detractors out of their names? Have you seen them embracing men like Reverend Wright? Have you seen any white politicians, especially at the federal level, embracing Reverend Wright? You haven't seen them doing it. See, if you're on the white right, you can embrace Jerry Falwell. You can embrace Pat Robertson and every other sawed-off half-wit who runs around half-cocked.
Exploding fucking shells on the ship.
But if you have a black man who tells the truth about the United States, well, you're not allowed to say this man is right on. You're not allowed to say that.
Well, because you're like, I want to say a second.
DNC leadership don't want to hear that any more than the Republicans do. And you know that's the truth. People like Keith Ellison, they thought that tiptoeing around Louis Farrakhan would protect them and would insulate them. They would show that they're the good.
Why he gonna protect them?
And the Supreme Court just slammed the door on Muslim immigrants. They're in it. They talk about the hits just keep on coming. The Supreme Court's on a roll, ain't they? Holding up the travel ban, deciding that Donald Trump can basically do with the budget whatever he wants.
The female detective, Benson, she went to this detention center, and guess who called with her?
She'll have to throw in the towel too.
Called with her.
When she does, that's going to be
Hold on.
He's going to be a super.
This is a synopsis of what they've already shown. Hold on.
That changes.
So,
simply because of how lopsided
they go to the gate. She said, I'm here to see them, but you're not authorized to come in here. You gotta turn the car around and go back. Yeah. This who jumped out and started crying.
Oh boy.
Oh boy, honey, he said, I'll make you look like you ain't Yep.
Motherfucker
So
froze.
up at the gate, the lady in the back seat, she went to get her daughter in an internment camp. And this is what fuckface, he got all them kids in an internment camp, don't know where the parents are, anything.
I'm like, they've been doing that to black people
I
first.
know.
I'm like, this is just blatant to where motherfuckers is like, they're parading around.
You don't hear Keith Ellison going all out for Muslims, do you? He's not going to.
Good shit, team. I like
on the
that.
surface, what he'll say is that he's concerned that certain Jewish interested parties
Yeah,
might
like
look and say,
Saratoga fucking Jewish people too.
But that's not what
And like the fact that the Beards are in Africa and for some reason they have rights to African diamonds.
He's not going all out for Muslims. He'll say a couple of things if you question him. You bring up the subject. You have to bring it up, not him.
I said, what's
He
that?
brings the subject. But if you bring up the subject, he'll go ahead and say something like that about that. But I think the Keith Ellison Ellison has probably been more vocal about illegal immigrants than he has about Muslims being effectively banned from the country. Muslims are no longer allowed to enter the country, and apparently Keith Ellison ain't got much to say. That's because he wants to be president.
Ooh.
And he understands
Oh,
that
now
it's
he's
okay
mad because
for you to say that
he wants to give
neo-Nazis
us
are
more.
very fine people. But you better
Give
not
us some more
protest Muslims
Huh?
We give
specifically
Charter
black
45
folks.
some more time.
No, so we'll give increase it from 600 to 1200 to $2,000.
American terms come from African
Yeah.
This is just black by the name. You better not question that.
Well, he's trying to make himself look
I know
good.
he's still fucking on
Question it
stuff.
either.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Have you heard making a big deal of it?
And them assholes
The
in Washington
Democrats
D.C.
exist for the same reason as the Republicans.
I say we put every motherfucker that was on his cabinet or that fucking rah-rah for him, we put motherfuckers on notice. Like,
And this is done
next
so that
election,
they will
you're gone.
Ever put
Next election,
someone on the ballot
you're gone,
for
miss.
any of that.
You
Not
put all
even
them
Bernie
motherfuckers
And
on
what's so
notice.
good about it? They still kissing his ass to keep him in
Bernie
there.
Sanders showed you exactly where he stood.
That would be an orange Cheeto I would never try to kiss.
You didn't hear Bernie Sanders
They
say,
still think he gets
I can't
on
stand
that.
cheese
how many
Cheetos.
rules we got to do for black
So
folks?
I
See,
really
I was
no.
the one
No,
who
no.
gave you the
There's a
verbiage,
blatant
gave you the argument
Biden
for
forged
why
the election. How the hell did he forge the election?
necessary for black
You can go to each state and try to forge some shit?
And I even told you why if some immigrant
That doesn't make any
calls
sense.
himself
That's
saying,
oxymoron.
I did nothing to black people. I did. Why should I
Just like that
do
girl.
something these white people did? I
She
gave
don't
you
be
the
on black people.
argument.
Every time I turn around, she's about black
It's for
people.
the same reason that I, as a black
Because they
man,
said
cannot
she
think
goes
that I'm
over
going to go to
someplace.
Germany and that I don't
And
have
that's not
to
her
pay
granddaughter.
for Germany's historical crimes, either against
Question.
other
If you
Europeans,
want to
definitely not against
Social
Africans. They make no
Common
restitution
sense,
to
you go to
Africans.
Social Security
Or
benefits.
against the Jews. If I go to Germany and my
I
tax
would
dollars
think.
are used in order to pay reparations to the Jews,
Keep
I
that
wouldn't be allowed to say, well, I'm a black man. I wasn't even born when that happened.
No.
If you want
You
to
call
live in
them
Germany,
the-
then you have to
you
be
go in there and
responsible for
ooh, no.
Germany's historical debts. And if you want to live in the United States, you got to be also, you are voluntary to take on America's historical debts. You
Period.
didn't hear the immigrants complaining when the government made reparations to the Japanese.
Nope.
Or when the government made reparations to Native Americans. People only complain whenever you talk about black people. That's because they understand that there is a common code of anti-black racism that's supposed to be the code of thieves and slave owners and rapists and liars together. They understand what the ideological glue is supposed to be. You see, if somebody wants to live in a nice home and they see this house, I love this two-story house with a car garage.
Just like
it's
the
got
banker.
a den and a study, and it's got two
How would you like?
bathrooms,
No,
four
no.
baths,
How would you like to be on the
all
other
that.
side of real
Well,
estate?
you're also going to have
What
to
you
be
talking about?
responsible for whatever
How about we like to buy a bank?
maybe
What
extends
do we
on
know
that
about
house as
banking?
well.
Banking
See,
is
when you
like
call
on the
yourself
other side of
decide
real
you want to
estate.
take advantage of the luxuries of a particular home, if that home's got any debts, you got to take on the debts too.
Exactly.
But I didn't rack up the debts. Well, if you want this particular
And
place,
there are 21 black-owned
you have
banks.
responsibility for it. And if you don't like that, then you need to
Well, I
find
can
yourself some
remember 21 black-owned
accommodations
banks.
where you don't have to pay those debts. Because if you come to the United States, I don't give a damn if you're an Irish immigrant who showed up 150 years ago, or if you're a Hispanic who just showed up yesterday, or if you're some white person who brought the first slaves in from Africa. If you're in the United States, you owe for America's debts.
Thank you.
And if you don't like paying the price for America's debts, if you decide, well, I didn't have nothing to do with slavery, yeah, but you benefit from it. Everyone who lives in the United States, except for black people, benefits from slavery. They benefit from the
I noticed that when I-
uncompensated labor of
When
black
I
people.
say,
But you will
when
not
we
hear
spoke,
Bernie Sanders say
very-
it. And you won't hear any congressional black talkers say it.
little bit of
So
call.
as far as they're concerned, when you talk to
Okay.
them, they'll go behind closed doors and say, well, at least we can't call the immigrants out. We're doing
Well, because
coalition
they got-
building.
they got
Coalition
bad
building's
growers.
supposed to go
Yeah.
both ways, stupid. And you don't see these immigrants trying to build any
Yeah,
kind of
so-
coalition
And
with
what,
us.
and what did Juliet want to do?
Hmm?
And
The
what did
Democrats
Juliet
will
want to do?
never put a change candidate on the ballot because change is the very
like
thing
ball-
that
like
they were
balling after
established to prevent. Dr. Claude Anderson says that the vote is nullified.
And
Well,
which one
that's
is going
only
to
true
be
at
a
the
business
national
person?
level.
Economic
At the local level, and in many
Simone.
cases, even statewide level,
My birthday
the
twin.
black
Okay,
vote is
Simone.
anything but nullified. It is certainly potent. The problem is it is an aggregate That's the problem.
You know, Luna might be a construction worker.
Because we either misuse it to promote left-wing white supremacists, or they're black flunkies, or we don't use it at all.
She got some
And when this whole illegal immigrant does stuff, we have black chumps who lift white supremacy who's fallen over themselves or crying for illegal aliens to confront the cameras. That's their job, to confront the cameras and show concern for people who aren't so
jalapeno peppers.
No.
That fucking too. And is looking at you like
racist narrative. That we'll say black people won't leave you.
That's hot shit.
Hey, how about these little
it's not hot shit. She's like spicy. This has to be on spicy. That's supposed to burn your butt.
What? This is where they're from.
For illegal aliens. But you have to get these scumbags in a headlock and put a gun to their empty heads before they say anything regarding black people. People, when they talk about black people, it's always the same old man-beat, mushy mouth, spineless rhetoric.
Yeah, never explain that fully.
Because it's not supposed to. And they never talk about punishing
anyone.
I don't talk about punishing anyone well.
No.
We talk about punishing white people by and large. Well, we can't do that now, can we? Oh, we have to question policy.
One of my subscribers is like, you get rid of that go fast? I'm like, nigga.
Are we going to point the dirty end of the stick at them?
Shut the fuck up.
That's the professional black talker's job.
Oh!
Run the cameras.
I'm like, yo.
And this kind of political theater sends the message loud and clear that people aren't being oppressed or abused because even their own leaders are more outraged about what happens to illegal aliens than they are.
He got in by a fluke. No, he got in by the electoral college.
That's what the white media does when they.
He got in by some strange shit. By some strange shit. The reason that Fucktar 45 even got in there.
Black people, and it's not an antagonistic.
Like that was sickening. That was sickening. That was sickening. Because the whole process of how Fucktar 45 Agent Orange got into office and how he ran his political platform, having motherfucking old racist some bitches filling two motherfucking NBA balls to think they can just jump up to a nigga. I'm talking about niggas that we ain't coming from we shall over. No, we coming from a swing low, swing left, swing up, swing down, uppercut, fucking stomping. Sweet chariot. Yeah, that's where I came up from. We ain't gonna swing, we swinging on your ass. Don't come to that stuff. You goddamn darky. How dark you wanna be? But ass whooping. Then they got these motherfuckers wearing these tight ass jeans.
Oh, I'm sorry, I know.
I'm like, when I started seeing that shit, I was like looking around like, yeah.
No.
I'm not looking like I stole my sister's quote. Like, that's the first thing that came to my motherfucking mind. I'm like, these niggas look like they stole their sister's clothing or what they bought it from. They say, I'm just gonna use your tight pants today.
No, honey, sorry.
No, bitch. You're not. Go in there and get the loose jeans and put the motherfuckers back on. Like, nigga, you done lost your motherfucking mind. You think you will come in my room and steal my fucking spandex pants?
Well, what about enforcing the laws that you're not allowed to kill people?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you know, our politicians, they're letting us down, you know. Yeah, that's what the white media does. They understand exactly what the purpose of that is. This is social programming.
Downtown Compton.
Whether
it's downtown Compton was where the black
George Washington is Roman or George Washington
all of a sudden they got rid of him.
or George Washington.
No, they did.
I know
Yeah, they did the they sent old boy in there.
They wrote the dope up, yeah.
When John Lewis stages a sin on the
Or what they did is they start paying crackheads and gang members to be like, yo, I'm gonna need you to go shoot up whatchamacallit shop.
Because we're the grocery store on the left hand side was the Charleston and all the other stores or whatever. On the right hand side were the other stores. They bought the land up. That's what they wanted. They want the land. That whole shit. They want the land.
Yeah, because when niggas thought, oh, white people just left and, you know, they're moving up to the hills, like, no, nigga, you gotta own shit, because no matter how long they up there, if you don't own shit down here, Nigga, it's just a matter of fucking time. So they start like buying up shit. And you're like, how did they get that spot? Because them niggas didn't have the money to keep it. And the community didn't come together and say, oh no. Because, Mom, look at the fact that Bill Gates alone, just Bill Gates, he ain't even talking about grabbing all the billionaires and shit. Just Bill Gates alone. He could literally pay for all descendants of American slaves, high bills, and don't even, it doesn't even affect his whole money for it. Like Bill Gates could literally pay off all of black people's debt. Look at them square in the eye and say, shit, don't even worry about that. That ain't even a drop in the bucket.
You think he would do that?
His salary depends on him not.
No, especially him and his bitch ass wife want to talk about niggas need to have the first vaccine. I'm like, fuck you, bitch.
First vaccine what?
First vaccine. We need to be the first people to get the vaccine. I'm like, fuck you, bitch. No.
Tuskegee? No.
Yeah. Tuskegee, the fact that y'all stole that black woman's DNA, used it before while she was born, while she was alive, and after she was dead. Didn't tell the family, but not only that, didn't.
It's all around the world.
In other words, that would have been patent. To where it would have been in a family trust where no matter, as long as you're a descendant of that family, you have money coming in. For them to do that, I'm like, yo, really?
No, they got. I told you, remember I told you when I put the book and I had a book in my hand.
Yeah.
In the case of a black.
It's like I said.
So they're wondering what the hell their next act is going to be. Hey, has anyone heard Roly Poly
Okay.
yet? Has he surfaced anywhere? You got a radio show yet? He's got another show. Hey, has CNN picked him back up yet? Has MSNBC given him a show? He's been auditioning and campaigning for that all
it's depressing. I said.
It's depressing.
Nah, I didn't think
maybe you.
Ain't the person me could tell me the truth.
Tamron Hall, huh? She's got to be on the
I think I like the fact that the truth is out.
I do too. Everything has.
Because the truth stands on itself. Like you got the truth backs itself up, stands on itself, and it can't be denied.
Remember, I went to the Goodwill and going with CO and CP.
Pretty much the only
And
one
I came back with a peak.
resembling a second act was Melissa Lace Harris on Perry Stephenberg around the world in 80 days.
I put it by the bed, I heard a clink. I said, I might turn around and I said, I knew this was going to take it. They took it. I didn't care. One $1.
She's just MIA.
That's cool.
Yeah, you see, when you get out there and carry water for white
if you want, all you have to do is ask them to steal it.
They're not looking to help
If
you
you really
make
did, you couldn't pay for it, yeah.
But of course, what's true for the individual is also true for the group. When we
Yeah,
look
but
at
not only that,
organizations
you
like
understand, we raised me around black folks owning shit. Before motherfuckers like I grew up and was like,
and these days, they see young people aren't having anything to do with
something's
young black
different.
people.
I said,
Turning their back on the NAACP because the NAACP
child.
has always has an attitude in terms of the black community. So this
we grew up where my
civil rights retreads, they're pathetically trying to
and that
reinvent
first time we
themselves
went
as some sort of
church,
ACL.
went back to church, she said, "Big going to church." I said,
We're like the
"Okay,
ACL, only staffed by
Bobby's
black
car.
and with no money
Yeah,
and no
Bobby's
social
car.
significance and
Went
no
there.
societal
Okay,
impact.
Reverend Mike's
They get
wife
nothing
and her.
done, they don't do anything, but
We
as
maybe
far as
said
we're concerned, they
in
want
the
to be
same
the
pew
black
as
version.
Reverend Mike's wife was sitting there.
And we see black publications in
And
particular,
I think it was
both
before
online and in print. These guys are the biggest whorehouses of them all, trying as hard as they can to get as far away from blackness as possible.
These two,
They
he
want to
said, I
amalgamate
knew
themselves. They
about
want to
these two even before they were born.
de-racialize themselves.
He said, no. He said, no. I knew their parents. He said, don't say it like that.
yeah, because you got to be
You got people
specific.
who have more war mind on some
Yeah,
shit.
so that's what I say. You got to be specific, nigga. You can't just say that.
But he said, these are my
We want everyone to look at us as being a publication that's for everybody. Well, if you're for everybody, you can't be for black people. We need advocates who are for us.
That person started telling stories.
Specifically, but
That's
exclusively.
that's to
We don't
be
need
expected
advocates
now.
who
Because
are for black
y'all
or
were
for
church
gays,
Like, but y'all were like, y'all were.
illegal aliens.
The fact that my grandfather broke away from Jim Crow fucking Willie Lynch type, you know, fucking teaching of the book of the Bible to black people, like,
I keep saying this and he was not a blonde hair, blue eyed, no. He was skinny brown.
That ain't Jesus.
Hair full,
black as charcoal.
Foot of brass.
Feet like burnt brass.
Feet like burnt brass, yeah. So don't tell me he's blonde hair, blue eyed, nope. Don't want to hear that
That
shit.
nigga had dreadlocks.
Go ahead.
Jesus Christ had dreadlocks, nigga.
And now you can do a whole lot of different designs with dreadlocks.
And I ain't dread. Thank you. Just think about how much more you can do with locks compared to like. Because I'm thinking about how I got you with locks now compared to like. Oh man, let me just tell you, I've never seen you with dreadlocks. The only time I've seen you with dreadlocks is why? Because you have a third twin sister named Whoopi Goldberg. And I kept looking at it like, the fact that you never had dreadlocks, but you had a third sister that looked like you with dreadlocks.
Remember Joyce?
Yeah, of course.
So when I finally met Joyce, after Daddy passed away.
I got this shit feel. Did y'all feel hurt or like was it just like?
We just want to know why he didn't tell us. And like when Mama asked
It's not
him,
easy thing to talk
because
about.
guess who went with him when he did it? Granddaddy. Daddy was with him. We didn't know nothing about it till we found it in the file cabinet. I said, what's this? $25 for child support for who? Mom, what's this?
$25.
$25 a month. Child support.
What the fuck? That's it?
That was 1965.
Oh shit.
These networks are no longer black friendly in any shape or
I said,
fashion.
when Mickey and Mama met Joyce.
And these black publications
Dang,
go,
Mama
well,
said,
hell,
she
if
said,
that's what white
I got no
lawyers
hate
do
Mama, I
to
hate
their
you.
black employees and these white media outlets. Well, aren't we, as the old black media, is it
Mickey said, Joyce,
and
look more like
BET
Mickey.
and Jet and Black Enterprise and others?
No,
Aren't we
she's
merely
older.
employees of our white corporate
Now
sponsors?
she's older.
What's true for
No.
the individual is also true for the group. White
Well, that's another thing too. But even though you weren't born at the same time Joyce was, Joyce is still your sister and shows your name.
What's going on? The old black people. They're panicking because they don't have a plan B. They broke faith with black people. People like you who listen to guys like me, you're the ones that they were trying to hold on to because you're the ones who actually paid for things. That's probably why you never see me talking
Until
about
you
the
fell
freaking all-star
into your
hip-hop
stomach.
crowd or the Hood Clips crowd or the sitting on their mother's couch
And breathe through
8
your
hours a
nose.
day
You
smoking a
can
joint
take a
crowd.
sip,
They don't know those clowns.
exhale.
Those clowns
Take
are
a
not going to
sip,
take us anywhere.
exhale.
They're not going to do anything.
Take a sip, inhale.
Black empowerment success or failure will hinge entirely on its ability to aggregate resources. And you don't get resources from hood rats and dusty tubes.
So that would make
You get
sense.
resources from people like you. You guys are the life's blood of black empowerment. I crafted this message over the course of a decade to be like this because you're the kind of crowd that I want to attract. Black people who are either business owners or, at the very least, gainfully
Mama
employed.
had court, Daddy had court.
Black people who know the value of a dollar. Black people who actually have money to spend, not with me, because I'm not even trying to get you to
But they
spend money
raised
with
us the best way
It's
to
probably
get
a lot of you wonder,
They-
Professor Drew, you keep talking about
They'll
putting
be
money in
really
black
good to you
media.
if you got any
So,
questions
you know,
to ask.
are you, is this asking us for money? Have you heard me ask you for money?
Nope.
In 11 years of talking like this, in 11 years have I done it yet? What I'm telling you is you better make sure that not merely are you somebody working for a living, not only do you have a couple of gold bars stacked up, but you better make sure that you put some muscle behind the movement. And that muscle always comes in the form of where you put your money at. That's why white supremacy is terrible. They're looking at what you guys are doing. What they understand is, you know, if these guys aggregate enough black people like this, right? Black people. Man, white supremacy finding itself on its heels pretty damn fast. As Rupert Murdoch broke the bastard's back, he decided he was going to put out images of white Egyptians. We broke his back. And look, I will freely admit, I say this openly, against my own wishes. I know some of y'all were out there saying the Black Panther was just the greatest thing ever. Your dollars make a big difference. But I want it to be understood, we cannot afford to have situations where you guys are putting more money behind Disney than you do behind the new voices of black media. Now, that ain't going to fly. That ain't going to work. It does us no good if you guys are withholding your dollars from the old, decrepit, sellout black media, but you're lukewarm or tepid when it comes to supporting the new voices of black media. The enthusiasm gap is real, but thanks to you, we are going to be able to vault back. People who actually are real are going to find that they don't need to be on any white media outlet, and they don't need to go begging any of these dying, desiccated husks that used to be black media in name only to give them anything. There are more than enough of you if we aggregate these numbers. There's more than enough of you guys to be able to support whatever type of aggressive black empowerment, pro-black media that we want to generate. There's more than enough of us to get that done. Some of you ask me all the time, well, why don't you debate so-and-so? You're like, mush mouth. Or why don't you debate somebody like a Matthew Heinbach? Why don't you debate a Richard Spencer? You need to debate so-and-so. You want to know why I don't debate these bastards? It's because I don't have to. I don't need to. Mush mouth. You know the guy who's
Yeah. 7,000, right?
He's looking for a white audience.
7,000.
When black people talk like that, when black people talk like Barack Obama, or talk like David Clark, two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
Barack Obama and David Clark are two sides of the same coin. These guys are looking for a white audience. You know what black people are trying to figure out how to get white people to look at them. And that's what they have to do, because they're depending on white people to pay their bills. I have never come to you and said pay my bills at all. Here's the thing. If I ever decided that I was going to try to build some sort of permanent full apparatus, I'll tell you right now, I wouldn't be looking at any white people to support me in any shape, form, or fashion. Because I've already got the best squad that there is. I'm not looking for white support. I'm not out here campaigning for white sponsorship. That's the reason why you don't see me sitting here trying to debate with these guys, because I don't have to. They're the ones who do this as a means of trying to show out for what they hope are going to be white benefactors. I don't have to lower myself to that.
I used to work for her at PCAL.
The old black media, they have to lower themselves to that because black people like you are gravitating away from these scumbags. And you are gravitating towards places like this. You're the ones who used to keep these bastards alive, and now you turn your backs on them. Yeah, Ebony, Chet, and Black Enterprise, you guys are all life support. We're pulling the plug.
He's hiding in the bushes and the trees and shit.
For everybody except black people, precisely because they know that that's what the white powers that be want to see from them. At this late date, even though it's obvious that white supremacy has had more than enough of them, they are still auditioning for what they hope are going to be more white dollars, this or that money, white interest.
Hey, you got to go.
As we see, the competition is fierce, and at this point it's becoming cannibalistic. All these fakers, frauds, and phonies tripping over one another to show who can be the most passionate in their defense of people who deliberately broke to the country, or people who have never held black folks' interests at heart. They also make a show of not pointing out that the entire reason these illegal aliens are being treated the way that they are is because the Hispanics said nothing for over 140 years as black people have been treated this way. The Hispanics didn't have a problem with black folks being treated this way. It never occurred to them that the exact same legal principles that are supposed to be able to anchor black people to our rights are the same ones the Hispanics are depending on for theirs. If if you make America into a safe
When they dress,
space
they white.
for the mistreatment of any people as a group,
Somebody got
then
shared
you're
history
also
and
open the door for
definition
someone to
there,
do it to you should you be in their crosshairs. This isn't new. This isn't unusual. This is standard operating procedure in the U.S. The only thing that's different now is that it's not happening to black children.
Sit down, relax.
Just a bit of an aside about that whole illegal alien thing. Now, the words you just heard me say, that's what Barbara Lee, Kamala Harris, Michael Eric Dyson, and the rest of the clown car of black misleaders should be saying, but never will. Michael Eric Dyson calls himself trying to defend Bill Maher. Bill Maher's been a racist for the longest time.
Thank you.
I mean, you know things are messed up when Ice Cube has to be the one to call Bill Maher on the carpet because you're supposedly black advocate, the man who fancies himself as being oh so learned as a mouthpiece for black people. Michael Eric, dumbass, won't say anything. Yeah, that's because he wants to be getting his little appearance fees for going on these shows. He wants to get his little $2,000 or $3,000 for these little white audiences, these little white media outlets. That's what he's there for.
Well, for some reason, my horse
You
didn't want to jump
cannot
to
and
him.
should not be allowed to separate the treatment of black people from the discussion about incarceration in the U.S., no matter who it happens to. I don't give a damn if somebody's locking up gay people for sodomizing each other. You should immediately point out black people. Anytime somebody brings up some other group of people, especially if the issue is incarceration, there will always be bringing up black folks. You should never miss an opportunity to mention black people. That New York congressman, I think he's from New York, Luis Gutierrez, whatever the hell his name is, man, you can be talking about freaking SpongeBob SquarePants. He'll still bring up Latinos, no matter what. He never misses a chance to mention Hispanics, no matter how inappropriate the subject matter. There is no subject too far-fetched or too out the weeds or something that's just so far afield that he can't bring Hispanics into the conversation. He does it every chance he gets. And to ignore how this is the way that black people are treated in the United States is to pretend that this policy and the racial oppression that underlies it just sprouted out of the
For
ground.
anybody to acknowledge anything that goes on in this country fucked up and not acknowledge the descendant of America's slaves, how they've been treated,
Donald Trump is
is
simply
damnable thing.
capitalizing on what America has always done. In fact, from Rikers Island to Pelican Bay, we've seen black people systematically and as a matter of standard operating procedure denied the right to know the charges against them, denied the right to counsel, denied the right to a speedy trial, and in a hell of a lot of cases denied the right to a trial period.
Yeah.
Black politicians ought to be using every conversation that they're a part of, any issue they're able to speak on, anytime they're in front of the camera as an opportunity to point out that when it comes to injustice in the U.S., nobody has it worse than black people. And that unless you fix the systematic mistreatment of black people, then it is impossible to stop it from happening to anyone else. That should be the whole of any conversation regarding these illegal aliens and their kids being separated. If you're going to talk about any sort of due process mistreatment, you cannot have a legitimate conversation without bringing black people into consideration. In fact, black people should be the only thing you talk about because we are the reason why this stuff happens.
Thank you.
You got a country that is trying to square a particular circle. And the idea is we're going to have it both ways. We're going to claim that we're not a white supremacist hellhole. But at the same time, we're going to be proving it every day through our treatment of black people.
Everything that you look at that's good about this country, you gotta give it to the sons of America's slaves.
A long time ago. They see themselves as no different than a white liberal. When you hear people like Eric Dyson and Kamala Harris speak about black folks with so little concern, have you ever noticed that they sound like they're talking about a group of people they're not a part of? Like they're talking about some other people. That's because in their minds, that's exactly what they're doing. They're advocating for this other group over here. Oh, these black folks? Well, you know, I got a couple of minor things to say regarding black people. Nothing too passionate, mind you, because black people don't really matter. Who matters are gays, legals, feminists, humpbacks, one-eyed, one-horned, blind, purple people eaters. black folks out here in the eye.
Blind purple people news.
Blind purple people.
The white power brokers and influence peddlers who these black mouthpieces depend upon for every crumb of their daily bread, they want to see the relentless legitimization of the idea that everyone matters except black folks.
Say again?
No one is asking how many of those illegal children committed some sort of
bird I
crime.
just sold to him.
Oh, we're going to talk about the kids who are being separated from their parents. Oh, they're putting them in cages. Well, did they commit some sort of crime? What was their behavior in school? See, they don't do that with these illegal aliens, kids.
But that's 13 little rats, and that was only $3.
Black leaders are supposed to be non-stop advocates for us.
Exactly.
I don't care if the discussion is about the price of rice in China. A black spokesperson is supposed to always bring us to the conversation. That's what they're there for. Who needs a mouthpiece who speaks for everyone except you? Or a mouthpiece who only mentions you when it comes time for re-election and never at any other moment? You know what? We are going to have to institute a system of punishments for that kind of behavior. It is not enough to merely be able to incentivize proper behavior. We must also have several means of punishing those who work against our interests. Not just one or two means, but we got to have an entire freaking war chest full of tools at our disposal that we can use to punish those who act against us. So long as we remain unable or unwilling to penalize these black mouthpieces for white supremacy, there's always going to be some John Lewis running around.
They don't.
Undermining us has to carry a heavy price. We must be the ones charging that price. These clowns aggressively push the gay lifestyle, which we all recognize to be antithetical to the growth black population.
Yeah, you get more money with
the lifestyle is not something that we as black people should have any interest in.
Dead or alive.
Certainly not any of these misleaders.
Don't say dead or alive.
See, other groups, whenever their leaders decide that they're going to get off topic or they're going to get off code, they pull their coat. They pull their coat. The white media also joins in as well. They make sure to question them. Well, you know, you said such and such about how black people shouldn't be shot. Well, you know, we need to look at the stats, you know. Stats actually mean talking points.
Yeah.
As black folks, we gotta stop letting the white media lead us around by the nose. Stand in our own interest. I don't care what's trending on Twitter. I don't care what this or that website makes into their front page posting. I understand that these white websites, white TV stations, and other white media outlets are all working in concert with one another. These guys are working as a team.
You can do that one?
Their staff members went to the same school.
This is the one you don't want to do with the lights off. I mostly do them by myself. Because when I got Professor Black Truth for it, motherfuckers get upset. I'm like, yo, is he speaking on anything that's not true? Nothing. Yeah, I'd rather have backup with a truthful motherfucker than a lie any damn day.
We're doing it as a distraction.
Shit.
When is white media ever?
Because I can look at that person and be like, load me the ammo, nigga.
Where has white media ever informed you? Can you think of one time
I need my power
white
tools.
media has actually told you something you didn't already know? Or that the white media made it a point to give you information necessary for you to hold on to and expand your own power? As a black person, I ain't talking about some talking head on PBS who's giving you
and it's a black woman that introduced you into bounty hunting. So when I get your level up on Red Dead Redemption, yeah, it's a black woman you meet to get your bounty hunter's license.
That's because we know that they don't work in our interests. We know full well the white media
she really brings in 9 dead motherfuckers and 1 living until the motherfucker tries to cause himself escaping. She counts to 10. This nigga sitting behind a barrel. By the time she counts to 3, this nigga got his hands up like this, like I give up. She just holds the gun like this. 2, 1, bam! She's like, now you got your 10. It's like, yeah. And see, I can hit the lock and watch his ass get eaten up by the
black media that forwards and defends what's in our interests and accurately tells us what is going to happen Those are supposed to be the operational pillars of real black media. You see, we're not going to be sitting here running for cover when the heat gets hot. We have our principles, we have our value system, we're going to stand on it.
2 bears.
You see, we ain't going to be like roly-poly Martin.
You got 2 bears in
Whenever he
cage?
sees
2 bears in
the
cage.
bosses, Kathy Hughes or
Calling
whoever TV done
himself,
looking at him and going,
scared.
you know what, it's about
Like,
time
hey,
to
asshole,
ask
that's
that
not scary. You're just
and all
dumb.
of a sudden you will start talking
What
black
happens when a
as
bear
his
is
Hail
like, you know
Mary.
what, fuck you.
That's supposed to be his
I don't
last
want to be
teacher.
your pet no more.
We don't need black
And they looking at you like, you look tasty.
who only start saying the right
What you
thing
gonna
as
do
an
then?
afterthought occasionally.
They don't look too cuddly and fluffy then. I do that.
I'll do the right thing, but only after I run out of all other options, when it's the only option left. Same thing with Don Lemonade over at CNN.
See it? Right there.
He'll say these days, I guess he's seeing the writing on the wall.
You got, but you got one cage that's over on this ridge too.
White
And
in
you
this
got
case, like Anderson Cooper.
You know the bears inside the cage or outside the cage?
Inside the cage.
It wouldn't take much for Anderson Cooper to
Inside
find
the
one of
cage.
his
I can shoot the lock off of it, and the bears will just be so happy to get outside the cage or tear them up and leave me alone.
But you know what? We are not going to be able to fight white media until we finally mature to the point that we are enthusiastic about following our interests and not their distractions. That's why I keep mentioning the enthusiasm gap over and over and over again. Black empowerment versus white supremacy is a clash of civilizations, or rather, it's black civilization versus white barbarism. But more than that, it's a clash of 2 diametrically opposed value systems. Ask the white historian or the white anthropologist what is the single most important development in the history of man, and the white historian or expert will say, when man discovered fire. Well, of course they're going to say that. Fire is what made it possible for the Europeans to create weapons. Beyond that, fire itself can be used as a tool of torture and destruction. It can be used as a tool of fear. To put fire in the apex of human experience, that makes sense for them because everything revolves around the principle of war for them. Now, on the other hand, ask the African what he sees as the most significant development in history, and a lot of them are likely to say music. Because this was something that goes beyond words. Music goes beyond what you can taste or touch. And yet, when the African discovered the use of harmonious vibrations, he found something truly extraordinary. Something that has the ability to create and to not destroy. Something that can change people's moods, make them relax, or make them feel compelled to get up and move. This is not merely a distinction of historical viewpoints. It's a distinction of fundamental values. The African brought music to the Caucasian too, but the only music that they seemed interested in were songs of war and battle. And we see this come full circle with the deification of genocidal George Washington. Taking a monster, taking a man whose only accomplishment, the only thing you can name about George Washington is the fact that he fought wars. That's all you can name about him. Please name one bit of legislation that George Washington got passed when he was president. Name one piece of significant legislation that passed over his desk. Name one piece of significant legislation that he put on the books. Name anything. Hell, name anything that he proposed. You can't, because he never did. The boy never was very bright. He was a man of few words and even fewer ideas. And yet you find you had all of these white supremacists who decided that they were going to make statues of him all over the world, that they were going to show him as being some sort of natural historical successor to the Romans and the Greeks.
That part where you heard about the fucking
they're letting you know what they think, or rather they're letting you know what they want you to
16 Chapel.
Oh, when they put him like a guy figure.
All this white supremacist propaganda, then you better start making it a point to embrace channels like this, to embrace outlets like this, to embrace real black people. You better start
Close to the universal to try to get that title. You can't get that title, so I play it. Don't.
Because if we don't do it, nobody else is going to do it. The only voices out there operating here.
Taking heads on heads, baby.
Voices of black. Nobody else is
Way ahead.
If we
Yeah,
had
get your damn gun on the back. I'm stab his ass. Fuck away from me, Mike.
We will expose these historical frauds. We will point them out.
Only like dogs out of mine.
That they're going to be provoked, and that's what we want to do. We want to provoke people. Because it's way past time that people got sick and tired of seeing these obscenities, whether it's George Washington, the God, or whether it's the white media prioritizing everyone for black people. It's way past time that we stopped just sitting on our hands for this. It is way past time that we stopped giving white supremacy a free ride.
How they did you on
If they think to themselves that they're going to explain away the crimes of
fucking
George
history
Washington,
pisses me
or that
off
they're
to
going to
know
explain
that.
away the crimes being enacted against black people today, we are
Why
supposed to
can't I
be
get
the
on
ones
you
who
when I'm
say,
like, what year are you? Where were you at in this year? And you like, wait a minute, why? And I'm like, because shit popped off and I need to know like instinct wise, like where were you
going to
at?
be having any black folks, at least no one like
Because
myself.
I'm like, you might have been more deprived than I originally thought.
Because I'm not here to try to get you to deify me. I'm not here to try to get you to put me on a pedestal.
I'm knowing.
Or to elevate me to divine status. You could make a statue of me even if you wanted to.
No, I'm looking at that.
How could you? Never seen.
But I'm learning from you.
Man.
See, that's what happens when somebody is operating in your interests and not their own. That's what happens when somebody is interested in the interests of the and not so certain.
Frozen death.
You've never seen Professor Black say,
they frozen death.
me first. No, it's black first.
They really couldn't keep these
I don't want
motherfuckers.
you to have any sort of
And how you gonna keep?
me on someone's ceiling. I'd slap you in the face if you tried. That's, first of all, it's a waste of time. That's
So how are you gonna survive on level 6 though, too?
Yes, there is a place for imagery. Yes, there is a place for symbols. Yes, there is a place for iconography. But Professor Truth ain't it.
Nope.
We got plenty of heroes who deserve to have their image immortalized in stone or steel. But you're not going to see me saying it needs to be me. White supremacy is about trying to control your mind. I am about getting you to control your mind.
Yep.
I want you to
What
wake
saying?
up.
I'm trying to get you to control that righteous mind.
Fascism all around you.
That was like
Because the day when we actually come to power is going to be the day when you have black people have the power to
Tell live vision programming.
George Washington to erase him from any place.
Tell him you visually to program. We're being programmed.
The ceiling of the Capitol building.
You gonna run up on me?
Matter how much
You better come get your funky ass fucking dog and blow his head and blow his fucking head off.
We have the ability and the willingness
See that? Just let him get about the
to
dog.
tear down anything that honors our oppressors because of what we are proud to do. We take glee. You can't do that. You're erasing our history. We take glee. Go damn right we are. We get to that point. We mature and grow to that point. We're making a point those who committed historical sins against us are going to pay. And we will deny them the favorable judgment of history by erasing it. We finally have matured to that point. Then and only then can we say that black empowerment at long last has finally arrived.
Leave that barrel on.
Should I let him go?
And let him go. You got people that should have done people that did her and does it.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm giving a beer for.
Thank you. Let's go, let him go. You can take it out of there. Let him be gone. No, let him do what you want to do. All right, go. You, yeah. How you feel that?
Out of lives.
Huh? Oh.
You started from the beginning.
Alright. Can I change it now?
Yeah.
So just what, stop it or what?
No. Just.
Huh?
Thank you for the Thank you for watching, viewer.
What?
No, because you got another person watching too. It's not just you. You see how it's 2 viewers?
Yeah.
That's the comment section right here. This is how many people are watching us play. Thank you for your viewership. If you like what you see, share, hit that subscribe button. We'll do it again. Yagi.